Chapter 2702, Silence, Alien? Shi Feng failed to comprehend Liang Jing's words for a moment. As his assistant, Liang Jing didn't just take care of affairs in Zero Wing's headquarters. Normally, she would also help Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose with tasks in God's domain. Hence, she had frequent contact with the two Vice Guild leaders. In fact, Liang Jing should be even more familiar with them than he was. Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had been absent from the guild for only some weeks. No matter how he looked at it, Liang Jing shouldn't have a reason to describe them as alien. Are you saying that their temperament has changed? Shi Feng asked after giving the matter some thought. A person's temperament would change along with the improvement of their knowledge and mental state, especially after a breakthrough in the limit of their brain activity. Shi Feng was a perfect example of this. No. Shaking her head, Liang Jing whispered in a somewhat uncomfortable voice, that kind of feeling. It's like looking at complete strangers wearing their faces. Wearing their faces? Liang Jing's words surprised Shi Feng. Are you sure? I'm very sure. Liang Jing said earnestly. Okay. Shi Feng nodded solemnly. This matter ends here. Just treat them like you normally do. Guild leader, are the vice guild leaders all right? Liang Jing asked worriedly. No matter how she looked at it, this change simply wasn't normal. If Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose really had a problem, Zero Wing would be in great danger. After all, the two vice guild leaders were responsible for most of the guild's daily activities, whereas Shi Feng was mainly a figurehead. I'm not sure yet. Shi Feng shook his head. I'm afraid I'll know what's going on only after I meet with them in person. Space-time mazes were very special existences in God's domain. Only an extremely small number of players would encounter a space-time maze when traveling through space-time passages. An even smaller number of players would encounter a mysterious space after leaving the space-time maze. This mysterious space was unresolvable. Many people attributed its appearance to a bug in the game. Every player that entered this mysterious space would end up in a very special world. Nobody knew what kind of world it was, and only one thing existed in this world. Slaughter. One would either be hunted down endlessly, or hunt others endlessly, or fight on an endless battlefield. It was as if the fragments of countless memories in God's domain were collected in this special world. Even when players were killed in this world, they wouldn't truly die. They would only go from one dream to another after their deaths, and this cycle would loop endlessly. Moreover, the pain players felt in this world wasn't mitigated in the slightest. The concept of time in this world was supposedly blurred. The time players experienced inside this world was something only their minds perceived, with no effect on their real bodies. Hence, even when a player spent 1 or 5 years inside this special world, only hours or days might have passed in the real world. However, time was the scariest thing in existence. After all, time could wear down everything, let alone humans. If Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose really came out from this mysterious space, a lot of time must have passed for them already, so much so that even their memories had blurred. Hence, it was only normal for them to change. The only thing Shi Feng didn't know was how many years Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had spent in that mysterious space. Meanwhile, according to the statistics from his previous life, the longer the time one spent in that special world, the greater the influence on one's mentality. Zero Wing Residence's top-floor conference room. Zero Wing's upper echelon and core team leaders were currently seated inside this magnificent conference room. Of these people, even the weakest was a level 116 Tier 3 player, while the strongest were Violet Cloud and Fire Dance, who had both reached level 121 already. However, there was still a significant gap between them and Shi Feng, who was level 125. Fire Dance had already replaced her old gear with a set of dark red leather armor. Based on the magic patterns etched into her armor, the armor was a set. Moreover, it even gave off the glow effect unique to epic items. Fire Dance also had her hair tied up with a ribbon that resembled the starry sky. The ribbon gave her an indescribable sense of fierceness, as if she were the empress of the night sky. It seems Fire Dance also reaped a considerable harvest in the space-time maze. Shi Feng was slightly surprised at the dagger hanging by Fire Dance's waist. Not only did the dagger exude a faint sense of hostility, but it even roiled the ambient mana. If this dagger were unsheathed, he couldn't even begin to imagine the impact it would have on the environment. Even fragmented legendary items paled in comparison to this dagger. However, when Shi Feng swept his gaze across Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, who sat on both sides of the conference table, he was taken aback. How can this be? Shi Feng was rendered speechless. After what Liang Jing had said, he had already mentally prepared himself for the worst. However, now that he saw them in person, he realized that the two situation exceeded his worst expectations. Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's weapons and equipment remained the same as when they left the western continent. Even their levels were still at level 117. However, the feeling the two gave off was utterly different. Gentle Snow had been rather aloof in the past but still relatively sociable. On the other hand, Aqua Rose had been a cheerful and assertive woman, and her eyes had always sparkled with wisdom and ambition. Now, however, the two of them could no longer be considered human. Neither of them exuded the slightest hint of emotion as if they were plants. They did not appear happy or sad. Although they were currently communicating with the others around them, their voices did not fluctuate with any emotion whatsoever. The only thing Shifeng could sense from the two was a deathly silence, although the feeling of silence each gave off was slightly different. In the case of Gentle Snow, her silence resembled bones piled atop a battlefield. In the case of Aqua Rose, her silence was like a candle flame in the dark, carrying both death and hope. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Besides Shifeng, everyone else inside the room also sensed the changes in Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. If not for the Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose they retained in their memories, everyone might have even had the urge to flee the scene immediately. Guild leader, did something happen to the two vice guild leaders? Yulan asked Shifeng through a whisper. The change to Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose might not be noteworthy for those unfamiliar with them. But for those who were, this change was simply terrifying and creepy. Given how they are now, it seems something must have happened, Shifeng answered, not hiding the truth. After all, this was obvious to everyone present. During the time Zero Wings members were secretly discussing Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's changes, Shifeng also shifted his gaze to the two of them. How long did you two live in that world? Shifeng asked them through a whisper. Chapter 2703, 80 years. Shifeng's words were like a drop of water falling into a silent ocean. Although it couldn't kick up any huge waves, it still caused ripples that spread out endlessly. As soon as Shifeng finished voicing his inquiry, a hint of surprise flashed across Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's calm eyes. This surprise contained neither excitement nor joy. They didn't feel as if they found someone that understood them either. They simply felt a little surprised. They wondered why Shifeng would know of this matter. However, their surprise soon disappeared, and darkness and calmness returned to their eyes. Afterward, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow exchanged glances. Aqua Rose then turned to Shifeng, an indifferent smile forming on her beautiful face. Sure enough, nothing can get past you, guild leader. We aren't sure how long we lived in that world. However, according to our calculations, it should be 80 years. 80 years. Shifeng couldn't help but gasp. Even his mind had gone slightly numb. He had thought of the possibility of Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow living in that special world for a considerable period. He had even considered the possibility of them living there for a decade or two. But 80 years? Many people lived only 80 years in their lifetimes. Meanwhile, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow had spent 80 years fighting ceaselessly every day. The mere thought was chilling. To spend 80 years alone. Just the loneliness alone was already unimaginable. Any normal person would have most likely gone crazy already. However, Aqua Rose's voice was incomparably calm, so calm that it was like she was talking about someone else's problem. 80 years. Complex emotions filled Shifeng's eyes as he quietly observed Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. It's no wonder you two feel like monsters. The moment he laid eyes on Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow, he could already tell that the two of them were no longer human. After listening to Aqua Rose's explanation, he understood everything. If the two of them had spent 80 years in endless slaughter and combat, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were the strongest in the world in combat experience. Compared to them, the 10 years of combat experience he had in God's domain was nothing. Not to mention both of them were combat geniuses. At this time, in terms of combat power, he was most likely a baby in front of Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. A baby trying to see through the thoughts and standards of an adult was simply a joke. Not to mention, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow would be adults even among Grandmaster martial artists. This situation placed Shifeng at a loss. He didn't know whether he should feel happy or helpless. Guild leader, Frost Heaven's Mushin just contacted us. While Shifeng was in a daze, Liang Jing, who stood beside him, suddenly spoke up. Mushin wants Zero Wing to gather at the Fire Dragon Empire's imperial capital. She says we are allowed to bring at most 20 people. It seems they're finally ready to act. Shifeng didn't feel particularly surprised at this piece of news. After all, Duan Hanshan had already said that Frost Heaven would soon take action. Did she tell you their plan? She did. Liang Jing nodded with a slightly gloomy face. Guild leader, are we really going to participate in Frost Heaven's operation this time? If possible, I wouldn't want to either. However, Frost Heaven's offer is too tempting to refuse, Shifeng said with a bitter smile. 3 reserved slots for the upper zone. This wasn't an opportunity one could come across every day. Even the various superpowers would pounce on it. Not to mention the upper zone had an important benefit he needed. While Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose might have gained 80 years of combat experience in that special world and achieved inhuman levels of combat standards, these benefits came with a huge drawback. On the surface, it would seem as if the two had lived in that special world for 80 years. However, only weeks had gone by in the real world. The instant the two left that special world, it would be as if 80 years of memories had been downloaded into their brains, placing an unimaginable burden on both their brains and bodies. During his previous life, the players that lived in that special world for 2 or 3 years had gradually had problems with their bodies after they returned. Eventually, they became paralyzed and had to be hospitalized for a month before they recovered. After all, digesting all these memories had consumed a lot of their mental strength, which definitely wasn't a good thing. Meanwhile, both Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had lived in that special world for 80 years. Shifeng didn't dare imagine how massive a backlash they would suffer. For the two's safety, he had to bring them to the upper zone. Although the S-rank nutrient fluid had great recovery effects on the human body, it only helped a little in healing a person's brain and spirit. Only medicines for brain and spirit recovery could resolve this problem. Of all the medicines Shifeng knew, even the life potion wasn't particularly effective in spirit recovery. The most the life potion could do was restore ordinary depletions of mental strength. It was utterly ineffective against a brain overload like this. The only solution he could think of now was the upper zone. The upper zone was a special region the Green God Company constructed. There were plenty of unknowns inside. In fact, the precious S-rank nutrient fluids and life potions circulating in the market were merely obsolete medicine the Green God Company produced. Guild leader, Frost Heaven is too ambitious, Liang Jing commented despite herself. If we're not careful, Zero Wing might very well perish. What are they planning to do? Shifeng asked curiously. Their goal this time is to become one of the 12 great guilds of God's domain, Liang Jing said. The 12 great guilds wasn't a random title made up by players. Instead, this was a title given to the 12 strongest guilds recognized by the War God's Temple. The player guilds that become God's domain's 12 great guilds would enjoy numerous benefits across the main continent. They could even garrison an empire and be worshipped by the said empire. An empire's worship. Just this point alone was more than enough to allow a guild to pull ahead of the other superpowers. One could say that the position of the 12 great guilds was something all superpowers had to compete for. However, competing for this position wasn't an easy task. A guild had to satisfy a series of conditions to qualify. Firstly, guilds had to become one of the top 10 rookie guilds. After that, they had to compete for the 12 reserve seats of the 12 great guilds. However, this was going to be God's domain's first competition for the reserve seats. The War God's Temple had announced that 6 were empty this year. Hence, for this year only, player guilds could compete for the 6 empty reserve seats so long as they met the conditions for participation in the competition. Due to Zero Wing's poor foundation, Shifeng never even considered participating in the competition. There were 4 conditions for participation. 1. Submit 2,000 units of 7 Luminaries crystal to the War God's Temple. 2. Have a guild residence in the capital cities of 50 kingdoms and 12 empires. Simultaneously, the registering guild must also have the status of a 4-star guild. 3. Have over 1,000 Tier 3 players in the guild. 4. Have 30 guild cities under the guild's name. These 4 basic conditions were extremely harsh. Ordinary guilds shouldn't even dream of participating in the competition. In fact, even ordinary superpowers wouldn't qualify. Only the exceptionally strong superpowers could just barely meet the conditions. According to the information Zero Wing obtained from the secret pavilion, close to 20 super first-rate guilds and super guilds would participate in the competition for the reserve seats, every one of them a titan in the virtual gaming industry. One could easily imagine how intense the competition would be. No wonder Frost Heaven made such a lucrative offer. Realization also dawned upon Shifeng. In his previous life, Frost Heaven had first entered the ranks of top 10 rookie guilds and eventually became one of the 12 reserve guilds before slowly climbing up to join the 12 great guilds. However, Frost Heaven was not fully developed at this time. Trying to compete for one of the reserve seats so soon would most likely result in failure. Frost Heaven had to know this as well but was still grasping at a strand of hope. Guild leader, If we become Frostheaven's foreign aid, any guild Frostheaven confronts will probably treat us as a mortal enemy, Liang Jing explained. The position of the 12 reserve seats was a throne built atop countless bones. At present, Zero Wing was in a very terrible situation already. On one side there was Starlink. On the other side there were the newly developed superpowers. There was even the extremely dangerous Saint's Hand in the Orc Empire. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. If they offended a few more superpowers now, Zero Wing would no longer have a future in God's domain. Although it is very dangerous, this is also a chance for Zero Wing. It would be a shame to let it go, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Fire Dance and the others should get ready. We'll set out immediately. While contesting for the 12 reserve seats was indeed dangerous, if they succeeded, even as foreign aid, Zero Wing would receive the War God's Temple's recognition as well as some basic privileges. For example, city garrison rights and worship rights. While getting an entire country to worship Zero Wing was impossible, getting one city to do so was still possible. This was also why many guilds had fought to become foreign aid for the participating guilds in the past. Chapter 2704, Maddening Start. Fire Dragon Empire. Flame Dragon City. Groups of players in black cloaks walked through the crowded commercial district of the imperial capital. What's going on? Why are there so many cloaked players on the streets today? Moreover, every one of them is so strong. A level 56 Tier 1 player, who came to the commercial district to upgrade his equipment, exclaimed in surprise when he saw the procession of cloaked players. Although Flame Dragon City was normally crowded with players, today's foot traffic was much more exaggerated than usual. Moreover, not only was the foot traffic triple the regular volume, but many of these new arrivals also gave off a strange vibe. In fact, players weren't the only ones wearing black cloaks. There were plenty of cloaked NPCs walking through the city as well, and every one of them radiated a terrifying aura. Although the city's resident NPCs were holding private discussions over this change, now that NPCs could think for themselves, they were deliberately avoiding players while discussing. This is normal. You've just started playing 5 Domain recently, so you might not know this, but today is the competition for the reserve seats of God's Domain's 12 great guilds. A level 109, Tier 3 man explained to the newcomer of his guild. God's Domain's 12 great guilds? The rookie shield warrior was surprised at his senior's words. Isn't that something determined by the Virtual Gaming Association? In the real world, the Virtual Gaming Association determined the publicly recognized super guilds annually. These positions were mostly fixed. Very few changes would occur every year. No. This event is hosted by the War God's Temple to determine God's Domain's 12 strongest guilds. It isn't a competition hosted in the real world, the Tier 3 man explained, chuckling. Does our guild have a chance to participate too? The rookie shield warrior asked, a hint of fighting spirit surfacing in his eyes. He had never heard of such a huge event happening in God's Domain before. Moreover, with God's Domain's current popularity, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it the world's biggest competition. If he could stand out in this competition, he would definitely rise to prominence. Currently, the various major corporations were offering unprecedented prices to recruit experts in God's Domain. In fact, the top 50 experts on the God's Domain's experts list made even more money than A-list celebrities. We want to join, but the entry threshold is just too high. Even first-rate guilds aren't qualified. The Tier 3 man smiled bitterly. Nowadays, the various powers of God's Domain were all talking about the reserve seat competition. Even NPCs were discussing it. The competition's influence was unprecedented. In such a major competition, let alone securing one of the reserve seats, just being able to participate would already serve as proof of a guild's strength. In that case, is everyone here to participate in the competition today? The rookie shield warrior asked. The cloaked people are most likely participants. As for everyone else, they should be here to spectate, the Tier 3 man explained. Spectate? Can we go watch as well? The rookie asked eagerly. I'm afraid that's not possible, the Tier 3 man replied with some embarrassment. The entry fee alone is 300 gold, while the VIP rooms cost 5,000 gold and 20 units of 7 luminaries crystal. Moreover, there are only 1,000 VIP rooms available. 300 gold was a huge sum, even for current Tier 3 players. In fact, most Tier 3 players didn't have 300 gold in their pockets. After all, with how high a Tier 3 player's daily expenses were, saving a lot of money was simply impossible. As for the VIP rooms, they were for the exclusive use of large guilds. Individuals simply couldn't afford them. The 5,000 gold aside, Just the 20 units of 7 Luminaries crystal was already more than enough to distress first-rate guilds, what more second and third-rate guilds. At this moment, the Tier 3 man wasn't the only person feeling embarrassed over this situation. Most of the other Tier 3 experts on the street also sighed. Spectating such a major competition would most likely yield a lot of benefits. I know, right? I heard that nearly 30 superpowers would participate in the competition, nearly one-third of them super guilds. Moreover, these superpowers are all sending their best. This is going to be the battle of a lifetime. I heard that too. Right now, everyone's going crazy over the VIP rooms. Some second and third-rate guilds are even offering to pay double the price to get a room. Upon overhearing the discussions of other players on the street, the players who couldn't afford an entrance ticket yearned for one. God's Domain's various superpowers rarely waged war. They generally only fought in small skirmishes. However, the superpowers were now going all out. One could easily imagine how intense the competition would be. Meanwhile, such a major competition was held only once a year. Flame Dragon City, War God's Temple. At this time, the various superpowers members had already thronged the majestic headquarters of the Fire Dragon Empire's War God's Temple, numbering in the tens of thousands. Even the War God's Temple had no choice but to dispatch level 180 guards to maintain order. Meanwhile, on the top floor of a high-class restaurant near the War God's Temple, these superpowers are really being careful. Every one of their participating members has hidden their statistics and strength with black cloaks, Mu Lingsha said, her lips curled in disappointment as she looked at the crowd outside. That's normal. This competition is going to determine which superpower will hold hegemonic rights over God's domain. It is only natural for them to try to hide as much information as possible. Anyone who exposes their cards now will only make easy targets of themselves, Unyielding Heart, who sat beside Mu Lingsha, said, chuckling. However, I didn't expect for so many superpowers to apply for the competition in the Fire Dragon Empire. Although there are many empires in God's domain, only 4 of them are ancient nations. Any confident superpower wouldn't let go of these 4 nations. While guilds can register for the competition at any empire's capital, the guild that wins a reserve seat in their registered empire will receive additional benefits from the empire. Sighing, Mu Lingsha continued, it's a pity Unyielding Soul lacks accumulations. Otherwise we could have come here to try our luck too. I wonder who will secure the 6 reserve seats? When Unyielding Heart spoke of the reserve seats, a hint of yearning appeared in his eyes. We can probably already determine who will get 5 out of the 6 seats. The last is the important one. I'm afraid those guilds are going to have a bloody battle, Mu Lingsha said gloatingly. The competition for the reserve seats was most likely going to be extremely intense. After all, if nothing unexpected happened, 5 of the 6 available seats would go to the 5 great super guilds. This left the other superpowers to compete over just 1 seat. The mere thought of the competition's intensity scared her. Look, Mythology's people are here, Mu Lingsha said as she looked at a group of undisguised players walking down the distant street. At the head of this team was none other than Cold Shadow. Mythology's arrival instantly cast a grim shadow over the plaza in front of the War God's Temple. Setting aside the fact that Mythology was one of the virtual gaming industry's publicly acknowledged 5 great super guilds, just the fact that Mythology's members were doing nothing to hide their strength already proved how confident Mythology was in its strength. Although this team from Mythology wasn't the main force that would participate in the competition, even the weakest in the team of several hundred was a level 116 Tier 3 player. Moreover, the base equipment standard of these people was level 115 fine gold set equipment. So, this is Mythology's strength? As expected of one of the 5 great super guilds. Even the team they sent to register is already so powerful. I really wonder how strong Mythology's representative team on the Western continent is. The spectators from the various superpowers and large guilds couldn't help growing fearful when they looked at Mythology's team. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Meanwhile, as Mythology's members submitted their registration to the War God's Temple, a round of exclamations suddenly rose from the plaza's edge. After Mythology's team, another team of players actually arrived uncloaked. Moreover, this team only had a little over a dozen players in it. Are they insane? Mu Lingsha froze in the middle of sipping her black tea when she saw this small team. After all, this team belonged to none other than the currently famous Zero Wing. Chapter 2705, We Have Our Way, They Are As Bold as Ever. Cold Shadow, who was registering Mythology for the competition before the War God's Temple, was slightly surprised to see Shifeng and the others among the crowd. They're tired of living, A nearly 3-meter-tall heavily armored man standing beside Cold Shadow said disdainfully. Previously they rejected your kindness and missed out on a great opportunity. Now they actually dare take part in this event, even exposing their own data. They shouldn't think of getting through the foreign aid selection at this rate. The various superpowers had all recruited foreign aid for this competition. However, due to the rules they could recruit only 100 outside helpers at most. Moreover, each helper cost 30 units of 7 Luminaries crystal to register, a huge burden on the various superpowers' finances. To make matters worse, recruiting foreign aid was one thing. Whether the recruited foreign aid could pass the preliminary selection and earn points for the guild they supported was another thing altogether. If the recruited foreign aid didn't pass the preliminary selection, then all the 7 Luminaries crystals spent would go down the drain. Due to these reasons, the various superpowers wouldn't let go of even the slightest chance to defeat their opponents, let alone give away advantageous information to their opponents. With the classes in God's domain countering each other, even peak experts would have trouble when going up against opponents that countered their class. In a situation where one side thoroughly understood their opponent's basic attributes and equipment, that side could accurately arrange the appropriate manpower to suppress their opponents. Now that Zero Wing had leaked all this information, its members would be hard-pressed not to get targeted. What is that black flame thinking? Did nobody tell them that this operation requires concealment? The eyes of a group of cloaked players standing at the edge of the plaza nearly fell out of their sockets when Zero Wing's members came into sight. The competition for the 12 Great Guilds reserve seats was an event of utmost importance. The various superpowers had spent a lot of effort just to hide their strength. Some superpowers had even purchased camouflage items for some of their ace members for fear that these members would get perfectly countered. However, Zero Wing had done none of that and boldly displayed its information to the various superpowers. Hong Xinyuan, are these the trump cards you spent 3 reserve slots to recruit? You've truly opened this old man's eyes. An elderly man with graying hair said as he looked at Hong Xinyuan standing beside him. The wrath in his voice made even Mushin and the other vice guild leaders nearby shudder. Great Elder Blue, this should be an accident, Mushin hurriedly explained to the blue-robed old man named Brilliant Blue. Brilliant Blue was one of Frost Heaven's 5 frost pillars. Previously, Brilliant Blue had nearly flipped over Frost Heaven because of Hong Xinyuan's decision to give away 3 upper zone reserve slots to Zero Wing. In the past, the Boulder Corporation had rejected Brilliant Blue's request for a reserve slot for his grandson. However, he had eventually dropped the matter. After all, the reserve slots were extremely precious, and the Green God Company wouldn't necessarily gift the Boulder Corporation with slots every year. Now, however, Hong Xinyuan had decided to give away 3 of these precious slots to a bunch of outsiders without even consulting with anyone. There was no way Brilliant Blue wouldn't get angry over this matter, especially with Zero Wing having made such a huge blunder now. An accident? Brilliant Blue laughed when he heard this. That's right. This is indeed an accident. An accident on a scale this old man has never seen before. Lan having no excuses for this situation, Hong Xinyuan said apologetically, some problems have indeed occurred this time, but Zero Wing's members are undoubtedly strong. They are indeed pretty good. Of the 17 of them, even the lowest leveled person is level 117, while the highest has even reached level 121. Each of them also has 6 pieces of epic equipment on average. This is a rare sight even among the various superpowers main force teams, Brilliant Blue said. He then turned to the other elders present and continued, however, they have exposed all their data now. It will be child's play for the other superpowers to counter them. Frost Heaven's 7 Luminaries crystals aren't easy to come by. Every piece is exchanged using the guild members' blood and sweat. I don't want to see those crystals wasted. I suggest removing Zero Wing now and having my grandson's subordinates fill up the remaining slots. When Brilliant Blue finished speaking, the guild elders present fell silent for a while. I think what Great Elder Blue said is logical. Now that Zero Wing has made such a blunder, we do need to replace them, one of the vice guild leaders standing behind Brilliant Blue said and nodded. Blue's words aren't unreasonable. I also think that it is necessary to replace them, a white-haired Grand Elder said. The dispute over the reserve seats will greatly impact God's domain's future. It might even determine Frost Heaven's life and death. We cannot afford to be sloppy in this matter. We don't have to take such a risk either. That's right. There is indeed no need for us to take this risk. After the white-haired Grand Elder spoke up, the other guild elders present also started voicing their agreement with Brilliant Blue's suggestion. As for the matter of finding new foreign aid to replace Zero Wing's members, nobody present was concerned about that. The various superpowers had prepared plenty of substitutes for today's event. Naturally, Frostheaven wasn't an exception. Not to mention, Brilliant Blue's grandson wasn't some simpleton either. In fact, he had gained the title of Sloth in the Flower of Seven Sins. If not for his having joined the Flower of Seven Sins, he would have already become a vice-guild leader in Frostheaven. Meanwhile, the Flower of Seven Sins was an organization proficient at assassination. Its members were natural killers. There was no superpower more adept at dealing with players than the Flower of Seven Sins, not even super guilds. Brilliant Blue's grandson was one of Frostheaven's trump cards in this competition. Having the Flower of Seven Sins' peak experts replace Zero Wings members wouldn't be a problem at all. Of course, Brilliant Blue's selfishness also played a role in his decision. The 3 reserve slots Hong Xinyuan offered to Zero Wing were actually his personal property. They didn't belong to the guild or the Boulder Corporation. Brilliant Blue couldn't force Hong Xinyuan to give them to him. However, if Zero Wing got removed and Brilliant Blue's grandson helped Frostheaven secure a reserve seat, Hong Xinyuan would have to give those 3 upper zone reserve slots to Brilliant Blue's grandson to preserve his reputation. Just as the various elders present were about to reach a consensus, someone interrupted them. "Dear elders, don't you think you're going a little too far?" Mushin said. "Mushin, where do you think we've gone too far? Do you find my words unreasonable?" Brilliant Blue asked in dissatisfaction. "What you said indeed makes sense, Great Elder Blue." Mushin nodded. "However, Uncle Hong contributed nearly half of the 7 luminaries crystals we used to recruit foreign aid this time. If not for his contribution, Frostheaven would have had difficulty collecting so many crystals. Now, Uncle Hong is only taking 17 slots for his own use, yet you are arbitrarily deciding to replace Zero Wing already. Isn't that a bit much? At least let Uncle Hong decide this matter himself." At Mushin's words, the Grand Elders and elders present fell silent. What Mushin said was the truth. Without the 7 luminaries crystals Hong Xinyuan contributed, they really wouldn't have been able to register so many outside helpers for the competition. Now Hong Xinyuan wasn't even using 1/5 of the total slots. They indeed didn't have the right to reject or help Hong Xinyuan decide. "What you say is correct, but we are also doing this in consideration of the guild's future," Brilliant Blue said righteously. "Old Hong, didn't you contribute those crystals for the sake of the guild as well?" Just when Brilliant Blue wanted to say something more, a dignified, middle-aged man in the team suddenly spoke up. "Stop arguing. Do you plan to make fools of yourselves in front of the other superpowers?" As soon as this middle-aged man spoke up, everyone present fell silent. Respect also appeared in everyone's eyes as they looked at this man. However, Brilliant Blue still refused to budge. "Guild leader, we cannot afford to be careless in this matter. Others might be afraid of 7 Wonders, the guild leader of Frostheaven, but not Brilliant Blue. Not only was Brilliant Blue one of the 5 Frost Pillars, but he was also 1 generation older than 7 Wonders. Hence, 7 Wonders still had to take his words seriously. Enough. 7 Wonders frowned. "This matter ends here. We will not remove Zero Wing. However, what Great Elder Blue said is reasonable as well. Notify Zero Wing that we won't help them during the preliminary selection. This is their problem, so they have to solve it themselves. Frostheaven does not have any excess combat power to spare." "Guild leader." Mushin was startled. She never thought that 7 Wonders would make such a decision. This was equivalent to abandoning Zero Wing. Hong Xinyuan also frowned at this decision. Without Frostheaven's assistance, Zero Wing would most likely have difficulty getting through the preliminaries. And even if Zero Wing passed, not many of them should remain. "Enough. Get it done." 7 Wonders said resolutely. "Understood," Mushin sighed. Mushin was powerless to change 7 Wonders' decision. She immediately relayed the news to Sherfone. As for how far Zero Wing could reach, that would depend entirely on Zero Wing itself. "Guild leader, Frostheaven is having us fend for ourselves," Yan Tianxing said, startled by the message Sherfone shared with the team. Yan Tianxing had advised Sherfone to conceal their information. However, Sherfone had rejected his suggestion. Now look what happened. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What do you guys think?" Sherfone asked Fire Dance and the others, chuckling. "Let them. We have our way of doing things. Why should we play by their rules?" Fire Dance said nonchalantly. "Big Sis Fire is right. I've also been itching for a good fight lately," Violet Cloud said, a hint of excitement flashing in her eyes. Similarly, Cola and the others also expressed their eagerness for a good fight. "Since that's the case, let's go get registered." Chapter 2706, Selection Battle inside a high-class bar near the War God's Temple's plaza. A feminine man in a light gray cloak appeared silently beside a handsome young man drinking red wine inside the bar. As if the feminine man did not exist, none of the bar's other occupants noticed his arrival. Young master, it'll be difficult to get those reserve slots. Seven Wonders did not remove Zero Wing. He only decided to let Zero Wing fend for itself, the feminine man whispered. Zero Wing's members have registered already. Now all they have to do is wait 3 hours for the preliminary selection to begin. Zero Wing sure is lucky not to get removed even after making such a blunder. The handsome young man named Sorrowful Heaven frowned slightly, then said coldly, however, Zero Wing shouldn't even think of getting its hands on even one of those reserve slots. Sorrow, how about I attack them directly afterward? A girl with disheveled hair sitting beside Sorrowful Heaven suggested, excitement sparkling in her eyes. The woman had the Flower of Seven Sins symbol imprinted on her arm. As soon as this small and delicate girl spoke up, everyone inside the bar shook visibly as they reluctantly recalled a scene in the past. Hayes, you have to abide by the rules this time. Otherwise, I won't bring you out anymore, Sorrowful Heaven said. A hint of fear had also surfaced in his eyes when he looked at this harmless-looking girl. Even after becoming one of the 7 sins, Sorrowful Heaven still dared not act carelessly around this girl. After all, death was the best relief when one went against this harmless girl. Even the Flower of Seven Sins' mysterious leader got a headache when dealing with her. If they did not manage her properly, she would easily trigger a catastrophe. Don't worry. I'll definitely listen to you during this mission. I won't recklessly do anything to those people. The girl named Imperial Haze nodded obediently and giggled. That's good. Sorrowful Heaven breathed out a sigh of relief. He then said slowly, we don't have to worry about Zero Wing this time. Now that Zero Wing has exposed all its data, the other superpowers' foreign aid will target them first. We won't have to do anything to Zero Wing. On the contrary, while everyone else is focused on Zero Wing, we can search for the War God orders. The selection match for foreign aid was straightforward. All registered foreign aid would be teleported to a special space to search for the War God orders scattered there. They would have 5 hours to do so, and once the time was up, all participants holding a War God order would pass the selection. However, the number of War God orders was limited to 100. In other words, only 100 players at most could pass the selection. Compared to the number of foreign aid the various superpowers had recruited, the number of available slots was pitifully small. According to the information they obtained, 6 super first-rate guilds and 3 super guilds had come to the Fire Dragon Empire to register for the competition. This meant that 900 players would participate in the preliminary selection, and only 1/9 of these participants could officially become foreign aid. Everyone else would just be wasting their 7 luminaries crystals. Meanwhile, Zero Wing only had 17 members participating in the selection. Trying to secure War God orders while going up against so many experts was simply a fool's dream. As Sorrowful Heaven was considering how he could capitalize on Zero Wing's predicament, Cold Shadow was resting inside one of the War God's temple's lounges. When she received news of Zero Wing's situation, she revealed a satisfied smile. Vice Guild Leader, did you receive good news? The female guardian knight White Feather asked in surprise. Yes. Cold Shadow replied. Although I don't know which dumb guild it was that invited Zero Wing is dead for sure this time. None of Zero Wing's members should even dream of passing the selection. Vice Guild Leader, Zero Wing's 17 members possess extraordinary strength. While not all of them can pass, there is still a chance that 2 or 3 of them will succeed, White Feather said, shaking her head in disagreement. It might have been possible before, but I'm afraid it's not anymore, Cold Shadow said in a playful tone. According to our spies, the Sky Dragon House and Pride Empire have come forward to work with Demon Palace and Miracle to annihilate Zero Wing. How is this possible? This revelation stunned White Feather. The competition for the 6 reserve seats was incredibly intense, and every participating power was treating the others as mortal enemies. 2 superpowers working together was already unbelievable. Now, for superpowers had actually banded together to target Zero Wing. What exactly had Zero Wing done to anger all these guilds? Nothing's impossible. Chuckling, Cold Shadow said, did you forget whom Zero Wing offended before? Is this Saint's Hand's doing? White Feather immediately thought of the incomparably mysterious Saint's Hand. That's right. Saint's Hand promised the 4 guilds something, and the 4 guilds agreed without hesitation. Cold Shadow nodded. Smiling, she continued, I doubt even Zero Wing would have expected that this preliminary selection would turn into their execution. Zero Wing is truly finished this time. White Feather sighed at this situation. Nearly half of the 900 players entering the battlefield were going to target Zero Wing. None of Zero Wing's members should even think of leaving the battlefield alive. After all, the preliminary selections battlefield was a special space that prohibited players from using berserk skills and tools and increased the consumption of stamina and concentration by tenfold. Such rules would greatly restrict the participants' combat power. Even powerful players would have difficulty fighting for a long time and would be vulnerable to Zerg tactics. Meanwhile, players who died within that special space would not only lose 5 levels but also be prevented from logging into the game for 5 natural days. This was the price for participating in the competition for the 12 Great Guild's reserve seats. Zero Wing had mobilized all its top combatants for the competition this time. If Zero Wing team wiped, the guild would undoubtedly suffer a devastating blow. Following which, time passed quickly. Amid the various superpowers' anticipation, the 9 foreign aid teams arrived inside the War God's Temple's selection hall. A total of 900 players stood on all sides of the hall. Some groups were large while others were small. However, aside from Zero Wing's members, everyone else present had concealed their information using black cloaks. Are they the targets? What a pitiful bunch. They probably don't know that our 4 forces have joined hands already. Once the competition begins, we'll attack them together. I wonder if they'll get scared silly at that time? How unfortunate. I wanted to challenge that black flame to check the results of my recent training. Now this chance is gone. The helpers of the Sky Dragon family, Pride Empire, Demon Palace, and Miracle conversed with each other through the team chat, their words filled with ridicule and sympathy for Shifeng's group. Sorrow, those teams are acting strangely. Every one of them is actually staring at Zero Wing's members, Imperial Haze stated as she looked at the 4 superpowers members. That's not surprising. Who asked Zero Wing's members to be so courageous? Sorrowful Heaven retorted nonchalantly. If I weren't afraid of Hong Xingyuan holding me accountable and refusing to give me those reserve slots afterward, I would send Zero Wing's members on their way even if the other superpowers didn't target them. Is that so? Imperial Haze still couldn't help growing uncertain as she looked at the 4 superpowers' foreign aid teams. By the way, we'll first pretend to move together with Zero Wing afterward. However, so long as we come across other teams during the operation, we'll immediately split away from Zero Wing and let Zero Wing's members tie down the enemy. Remember, you better not take action, Sorrowful Heaven said sternly. I understand. Imperial Haze nodded. Shortly after Sorrowful Heaven finished speaking, everyone in the hall felt their vision blur momentarily. When they recovered, they discovered that they had already arrived inside a forested valley. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After scanning his surroundings, Sorrowful Heaven found that the various teams were situated relatively close to each other. If they abandoned Zero Wing too soon, they would most likely get caught by a different team during their retreat. We'll move together with Zero Wing first, Sorrowful Heaven said through the team chat. However, even after Sorrowful Heaven gave this command, none of the Flower of Seven Sins' members moved. Instead, they all stood still, looking dumbfounded. This was because nearly half of the foreign aid teams present had started dashing in their direction like a bunch of madmen as Sorrowful Heaven issued his command. What's going on? Sorrowful Heaven was similarly stunned as he looked at the several hundred players charging at his team from all directions. Chapter 2707, Fire Dragon's 6 Absolutes. Upon seeing 400 people acting in unison, let alone Sorrowful Heaven, even the other foreign aid teams in the distance were dumbfounded by this situation. Are these people crazy? Zero Wing has only exposed some weaknesses that can be exploited. Do these people really need to behave like this? What kind of guild is Zero Wing? Did it desecrate these people's ancestral graves? In the preliminary selection, it wasn't far-fetched to say that aside from the members of one's team, everyone else was an enemy. There did not exist any possibility for cooperation. Yet, 4 teams were now working together to annihilate Zero Wing's members. Moreover, these teams had perfect coordination with each other. Nobody would believe it if someone said there was no hatred between Zero Wing and these teams. Boss Sorrow, these people should be aiming at Zero Wing, a level 117 Tier 3 ranger from the Flower of Seven Sins reported to Sorrowful Heaven. When he observed the movements and goal of these 4 teams, he gulped nervously despite himself. What exactly did Zero Wing do to make 4 superpowers take such drastic action? At this moment, Sorrowful Heaven couldn't help staring at Shifeng's group in shock. Based on the four teams' coordinated movements, it was clear they had discussed things beforehand. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone all out to annihilate Zero Wing's members as soon as the selection began. Zero Wing was merely an up-and-coming pseudo-superpower, yet it had actually provoked four superpowers into working together to deal with it. This was definitely a first in God's domain. If word of this situation spread, Zero Wing would instantly become famous throughout God's domain. "Boss, what should we do?" the Tier 3 Ranger asked. "Let's wait and see first before making a decision," Sorrowful Heaven commanded calmly and quickly. Based on the four teams' killing intent, he could tell that they weren't targeting the Flower of Seven Sins. Even so, he still had to be careful. After all, every one of these foreign aid teams had famous experts in them, and even the weakest of their members was a Flowing Water Realm expert. Many of them were even Void Realm experts, an existence that even the guild leaders of first-rate guilds had to tread carefully around. The four teams' coordinated charge was equivalent to 400 guild leaders or vice-guild leaders of first-rate guilds charging together. Just the thought of it made Sorrowful Heaven's scalp prickle. Less than 10 seconds later, several dozen figures dashed past the Flower of Seven Sins members, their passage scattering the surrounding flowers and grass. Meanwhile, the moment these people passed by, everyone from the Flower of Seven Sins, with the exception of Imperial Haze, felt a sense of relief. The pressure they gave off is too frightening. "I think over 80% of these people are Void Realm experts," a level 117 Tier 3 assassin exclaimed as he wiped the sweat off his forehead. The other Flower of Seven Sins members also nodded in agreement with this Tier 3 assassin's assessment. Although it was indeed true that even their weakest members were at the Flowing Water Realm, there were only 5 Void Realm experts on their team. While Sorrowful Heaven was a Domain Realm expert in this special space, he would have difficulty going up against 3 Void Realm experts simultaneously. He might even get killed. In other words, if they excluded the monstrous Imperial Haze, the overall strength of the several dozen players that had just passed by was still above them. Meanwhile, this was only a small portion of the strength 4 foreign aid teams commanded. "You think the strongest among these people are only at the Void Realm?" After calming himself, Sorrowful Heaven couldn't help rolling his eyes at his subordinates. "Boss Sorrow, are you saying there are peerless experts hidden among these people?" Everyone gasped reflexively when they heard Sorrowful Heaven's words. Peerless experts. They were existences even super guilds had to be wary of, the important mainstays of the various superpowers. Otherwise, do you think those superpowers would spend so many 7 luminaries crystals to recruit foreign aid? Glancing at the afterimage left behind by a muscular old man, Sorrowful Heaven took a deep breath and said, "I suspect that old man who rushed past us just now is 3 Autumns, one of the Grand Elders that founded the Fire Dragon Adventurer Alliance." 3 Autumns? The person known as Skyshaker? The Flower of Seven Sins members shuddered at this name. According to the rumors, 3 Autumns was a phenomenal existence. Relying on his incredible Ghost Hammer technique, he had not only defeated several Apex experts from the Sky Dragon family but also fought one of the Super Guild's dragon heads to a standstill. After that feat, 3 Autumns had gained the title of Skyshaker in the Fire Dragon Empire. This, in turn, allowed the newly emerged and loosely organized Fire Dragon Adventurer Alliance to get a foothold in the Fire Dragon Empire. 3 Autumns should be the trump card of one of the foreign aid teams. The other teams should have their own peerless experts as well. As Sorrowful Heaven watched the 4 teams close in on Shifeng's group, an indescribable sense of shock filled him. These 4 superpowers really think highly of Zero Wing. Although the Flower of Seven Sins team had Imperial Haze as a trump card, if it had to go up against 4 peerless experts simultaneously, only death awaited its members. Aside from Imperial Haze, everyone else wouldn't have any chance to survive. Just what kind of ability did Zero Wing possess to warrant such a frightening lineup? While Sorrowful Heaven was feeling stunned, the 4 foreign aid teams had arrived before Zero Wing's members. A total of 400 powerful experts were directing their killing intent at Shifeng and his companions. The killing intent radiated by any one of these experts was more than enough to turn ordinary players pale. Now that all 400 of these people were releasing their killing intent simultaneously, the space around Shifeng's group even started to darken. In fact, even from over 1,000 yards away, the Flower of Seven Sins' members still felt a chill crawl down their backs, and they felt an urge to flee. "Young man, don't blame us for bullying you with numbers. If you have to blame someone, blame yourself for behaving too arrogantly and offending people you shouldn't offend." 3 Autumns said, sighing as he looked at Shifeng. "What's the point of talking to them? The sooner we get rid of them, the sooner we can get down to business. The one-eyed, young male guardian knight standing beside Three Autumns said. Red Rain, don't say that. At least let them die knowingly. That way they can have a smoother path ahead of them. A beautiful woman with long elven ears and a graceful figure chided with a smile. Black Flame, I originally wanted to have a fair fight with you, but work comes first for me. Don't blame me for prioritizing victory over fairness. A white-haired youth wielding a great sword declared as he walked out of the crowd. When these four people appeared, the crowd spectating in the distance couldn't help gaping and gasping in shock. Sky Shaker, Red Rain, Elven Enchantress and Mad Sword. Why are all these people here? At this moment, let alone the Flowing Water Realm experts, even a Domain Realm expert like Sorrowful Heaven spontaneously broke out in a cold sweat. He never thought that his guess was actually on the mark. 4 of the Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes had actually gathered here. If these 4 people worked together, they could move unhindered in the Fire Dragon Empire. Even the Empire's super guilds wouldn't dare to offend them casually. Guild leader, these 4 people aren't ordinary opponents. It'll be risky for us to clash with them, Yin Tianqing warned as he looked at the 4 smiling people. The fame of the Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes resounded even in the distant Starmoon Kingdom. This was because every one of these 6 absolutes had gained their fame through their astonishing battle records. They were different from experts whose reputations were due to the bragging of guilds. It seems even the heavens want Zero Wing dead this time. Sorrowful Heaven couldn't help but lament over this situation. However, despite his feelings over the matter, he still eagerly hoped for Zero Wing's demise. Otherwise, the upper zone would forever be beyond his reach. Black Flame, now that you're aware of the situation, if you want to hate someone, hate yourself for being too arrogant. As soon as the level 119 Elven Enchantress said this, she retrieved the bow slung on her back and shot an arrow at Sherfong. Tier 3 skill Sky Piercer. The next moment, a blue flash punctured a hole through space and crossed the 60-yard distance in the blink of an eye. The arrow's speed was so fast that even Sorrowful Heaven and the other spectators failed to react to it immediately. Moreover, the arrow carried so much power that the punctured space continued cracking even after the arrow had passed. I just didn't see you for a while, and your arrow's speed has actually become faster? I could barely perceive it at this close distance, Red Rain said as he looked at Elven Enchantress. Isn't it better to let him die without pain? Elven Enchantress smiled faintly as she put her longbow away. Elven Enchantress's gentle smile awoke a sense of dread in the other 3 absolutes present. None of them objected to her words, though. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. If Elven Enchantress launched her arrow within 100 yards, even Tier 3 assassins would fall without knowing what hit them. Not to mention Sherfong was only a swordsman. However, as soon as Elven Enchantress finished speaking, a playful chuckle entered everyone's ears. Die. I'm afraid you're still not quite up to scratch for that. The next moment, a person actually walked out of the shattered space, and this person was even toying with the blue arrow Elven Enchantress shot out just now. Chapter 2708, Transient Sword. Upon seeing Sherfong walk out of the shattered space, everyone from the 4 hostile teams fell deathly silent, their eyes nearly falling out of their sockets. He's fine. He actually blocked it? Everyone felt like they were dreaming when they saw Sherfong emerge from Elven Enchantress's attack unscathed. Many of the Flowing Water Realm experts even rubbed their eyes to verify that they weren't hallucinating. That was one of Elven Enchantress's arrows they were talking about. According to rumor, the longbow Elven Enchantress wielded was a fragmented legendary weapon, and she could even repulse mythic monsters of the same level with its help. Moreover, Elven Enchantress hadn't launched just any ordinary arrow at Sherfong either. The arrow she used was made entirely of precious mana jade steel. The arrow also had ancient magic runes carved on it. Even a Tier 3 player using an ordinary longbow could repel a mythic monster of the same level with this arrow. The combination of these 2 things was what made Elven Enchantress one of the Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes. He actually blocked such a fast arrow? Black Flame is even stronger than what we heard. It seems the rumors of him being a peerless expert are true. The Flower of Seven Sins' Tier 3 members spectating in the distance couldn't help but marvel at this scene. Previously, they had failed to respond to Elven Enchantress's arrow despite having a bird's-eye view of the battlefield. If they were targeted by such an arrow from a distance of several dozen yards, they didn't dare imagine what would happen. He blocked it. Sorrowful Heaven eyed his subordinates with contempt when he overheard their discussion. You think he merely blocked it? Sorrowful Heaven's words only confused them. Look carefully. What is he holding in his hand? Sorrowful Heaven questioned angrily. He's holding an arrow? Everyone grew even more confused. You bunch are really stupid. Sorrowful Heaven was momentarily rendered speechless by his subordinates. He then turned to look at Shi Feng in the distance, horror surfacing in his eyes. Arrows are considered consumables in God's domain. So long as they hit something, they will disintegrate even if they get blocked by a skill or a weapon. Then, the arrow in Black Flame's hand. The Flower of Seven Sins members subconsciously turned to look at the blue arrow Shi Feng held. Immediately, a chill overwhelmed their entire bodies. That's right. The arrow never hit him. Instead, he snatched the arrow out of the air. When Sorrowful Heaven finished speaking, rank disbelief filled his eyes. At this point, Sorrowful Heaven wasn't the only person to notice the crux of the problem. The 4 foreign aid team's domain realm experts also noticed it, and their faces turned ashen. Guild leader? Yen Tianxing also stared at Shi Feng in surprise. Elven Enchantress's attack was most likely top-notch even among the peerless experts in the current god's domain. Nonetheless, Shi Feng had caught the arrow. Was this really a feat players could accomplish? However, compared to the Apex experts present, Skyshaker, Red Rain, Elven Enchantress, and Mad Sword found this situation even more unbelievable. How did he do it? Elven Enchantress's expression turned solemn as she gazed at Shi Feng. She knew better than anyone just how fast her simple attack was. If she launched this arrow of hers within 100 yards of her target, she was confident that even the other 5 of the 6 absolutes wouldn't be able to block it. Even speed-type mythic monsters would get struck. Everyone, Black Flame is much stronger than we expected. I'm afraid the 4 of us will have to work together to take him down, Three Autumns suggested with a grim expression. Okay, I have no opinion. Red Rain nodded. It seems we can only do that, Mad Sword answered through gritted teeth. They had their pride as peerless experts and they disdained ganging up on people. However, as experts, they could see the gap between themselves and Shi Feng after just a single exchange. To complete the task the 4 superpowers entrusted them, they had no choice but to work together. Moreover, there was another important point, the death penalty in the selection battle. Even peerless experts like themselves would suffer a tremendous setback if they died here. Good. In that case, Red Rain and I will keep Black Flame busy. Mad Sword, you and Elven Enchantress support us from the sides. Red Rain and I will use everything we have to create an opening. Once you find a chance, don't hold back, Three Autumns commanded quietly. Also, everyone else, once the 4 of us pin down Black Flame, use everything you have to get rid of Zero Wing's other members. Do not let them support Black Flame. No problem. Leave it to me to block him once the battle begins. Red Rain nodded confidently. He was a Guardian Knight, while Three Autumns was a Berserker. This was an excellent melee combination for dealing with stronger opponents and creating opportunities. In addition, Mad Sword was a greatsword-wielding swordsman, and Elven Enchantress was a ranger. Their classes were adept at executing finishing blows and ambushes. Black Flame. I truly underestimated you. It's no wonder those 4 superpowers are willing to work together to eliminate you. Elven Enchantress also grew serious as she took in Shi Feng's nonchalant attitude. She then responded quietly, although I don't want to, I'll do my best to support you this time. As a ranger, having her arrows caught barehanded was a huge humiliation. Playing a supporting role in a fight was also the last thing she wanted to do. However, she couldn't care less about her pride right now. Completing the mission had priority. Vice Alliance Leader Autumns, leave Zero Wing's other members to us. We won't let any of them assist Black Flame. That's right. They're but 16 people. It'll only take us a few seconds to get rid of them. The other members of the 4 foreign aid teams also responded to Three Autumns' command, all of them expressing their confidence in resolving this matter quickly. Good. In 3 seconds we'll take action together. Since nobody had any objections to his commands, Three Autumns nodded and focused his attention on Shi Feng, who stood 30 yards away. As for everyone else, they promptly spread out, seeking the optimal position to coordinate with each other. However, after the foreign aid team's members got to position, an indifferent voice broke the silence and made everyone shudder involuntarily. It seems you are finally ready. In that case I can make my move now. Shi Feng's voice was indescribably calm. However, the meaning behind his words couldn't be any more obvious. He was basically making fun of the 4 Absolutes' determination to work together. What arrogance! Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU furious at Shi Feng's words, Red Rain immediately activated the Tier 3 Justice Sprint and charged at the swordsman with his shield raised. The space around Red Rain turned blurry and chaotic, making it difficult for others to time and dodge or block his attack. Go! Upon seeing this situation, 3 Autumns commanded everyone to take action before joining the charge himself. However, before 3 Autumns could even take a step forward, everyone present suddenly felt as if time had switched to slow-mo. This illusion lasted for a moment, then everyone gasped. Before they realized it, Shifeng was already standing behind Red Rain. A long sword as dark as night had also pierced Red Rain's heart. Immediately afterward, Shifeng pulled the long sword from Red Rain's back, and the Guardian Knight's HP drained away until nothing remained. Red Rain then collapsed onto the soft grass, his eyes wide with horror and confusion. Chapter 2709. Difference in Strength, Impossible. What happened? I must be dreaming. Red Rain's sudden death paralyzed the foreign aid team's members who were thinking of attacking Zero Wing's other members. Some of them fell into shock and others were petrified. However, one thing was for certain. The sight of Red Rain collapsing had already been thoroughly imprinted in their minds. They would never forget this scene for the rest of their lives. Is he even human? Sorrowful Heaven, who was spectating from a distance, was stunned. As he stared at the dead Guardian Knight, the shock in his eyes compounded. For a moment he wondered if he was hallucinating. However, Sorrowful Heaven knew that what he saw was no illusion. At this time, the frightening aura Red Rain exuded had vanished. Even the life aura and mana fluctuations the Guardian Knight radiated were no more. Only he was having a hard time accepting this scene, so his brain had dreamed up an acceptable alternative to deny the reality. At this time, Sorrowful Heaven wasn't the only domain realm expert plagued with such a feeling. Every spectating domain realm expert was the same. Yen Tianxing was no exception. A peerless expert. This was an existence that represented the peak combat power of God's domain, yet one such expert currently lay dead on the ground. Meanwhile, the whole battle. No. This shouldn't even be considered a battle. In fact, most of the people present didn't even understand how Red Rain had suffered an attack. Monster. He definitely isn't human. He must be one of God's domain's monsters in human shape. Yes, that must be it. There's no way such a huge gap can exist between players. The players spectating from a distance couldn't help but exclaim one after another as they gazed at Shifeng. Yes, everyone be careful. He must be a transformed monster. He's not a player at all. To think that such a monster would actually appear in the selection. We must notify the War God's Temple about this immediately. The foreign aid players planning to target Zero Wing's members overheard the spectating players' exclamations and lost their cool. Simultaneously, they frantically considered ways to contact the War God's Temple to slay Shifeng. Only by embracing this logic could they return to the world they recognized. After all, even the NPCs in God's domain were behaving like actual humans nowadays. It wouldn't be strange for monsters to transform into players either. A monster? Shifeng chuckled involuntarily when he saw his demented opponents. Indeed, I would look like a monster in your eyes. However, aren't you monsters in the eyes of ordinary players? Ultimately, God's domain was still a game. So long as players continuously leveled up and obtained better weapons, equipment, basic attributes, physiques, reaction speed, mana control, etc., their combat power would also keep rising. In fact, even an ordinary player could gain strength that was unfathomable to the current great experts. God's domain was precisely such an unreasonable world. If this battle had occurred before Shifeng had reached Tier 4, even he would have had to rely on tricks to defeat a peerless expert like Red Rain. However, after he got promoted to Tier 4, Red Rain was no different from an ant to him. Yes, the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 classes was that massive. In the eyes of others, peerless experts were invincible existences. However, to the current Shifeng, they were like ants that he could squish with a wave of his hand. In fact, to kill Red Rain, Shifeng had only used the Tier 2 Wind Blade. Meanwhile, everyone present was momentarily rendered speechless by Shifeng's rhetorical question. Just as Shifeng had said, ordinary players were nothing in their eyes. If they got serious, they could even kill ordinary players before the latter knew they were under attack. At this time, 3 Autumns, the eldest and most experienced player of the 4 teams, suddenly stepped forward. Guild leader Black Flame, we admit defeat. Can I ask you to let us go? Although 3 Autumns didn't understand how Shifeng had become so strong, they had no choice but to abandon the assault on Zero Wing, given the circumstances. Now retaining their lives had greater priority. After all, they weren't the four superpowers' subordinates but partners. You admit defeat? Shifeng was slightly surprised by Three Autumn's words. However, he quickly understood the elderly man's reason for doing so. The death penalty for this selection battle was exceptionally heavy. Let alone apex experts, even peerless experts like Three Autumns would suffer a major setback. Yes. Three Autumns nodded. None of the four allied foreign aid team's members objected to Three Autumn's decision either. After all, they truly couldn't imagine what would happen if they fought against a monster like Shifeng. After scanning the silent crowd around him, Shifeng said calmly, "Sure, but you need to sign a contract with me. Once you leave this place, each of you must kill 5 experts belonging to the superpowers backing you, and these experts must be of the same standard as yourselves." As soon as Shifeng finished speaking, the 4 team's experts immediately clamored in protest. Guild leader Black Flame, aren't you going too far? Elven Enchantress frowned, a glint of anger appearing in her eyes. If we really do as you say, do you think those superpowers will let us off the hook? They would, at most, lose 5 levels if they died on this battlefield. However, if they offended the superpowers backing them, they wouldn't just lose 5 levels but would most likely get hounded out of God's domain. After all, if these superpowers did nothing after getting stabbed in the back by their so-called partners, who would take them seriously in the future? Going too far? Shifeng chuckled. I don't think so at all. From how I see it, you take Zero Wing for a pushover. If Zero Wing were one of the 5 great super guilds, would you still find this condition to be too much? Guild leader Black Flame, is there a need to make such assumptions? Breathing out a deep sigh, Three Autumns added, if Zero Wing really were one of the 5 great super guilds, we wouldn't have accepted this partnership to begin with. So your assumption simply isn't valid. Also, while we are indeed no match for you, if it really comes down to a fight, you won't come out unscathed either, Guild leader Black Flame. After all, our stamina and concentration consumption is drastically increased here. How many people can you possibly kill by yourself? And how many people would your team have left at the end of the battle? Rather than suffer mutual destruction, isn't it better if we settle things in another manner? Three Autumns clearly stated the various possible scenarios and listed their respective pros and cons. At this moment, let alone Yulan, Gentle Snow, and Aqua Rose, even Sorrowful Heaven, who was also in a leadership position, felt that this was the best option. After all, both sides weren't mortal enemies. To ensure Zero Wing's continued development, it was in Shifeng's best interest to avoid unnecessary losses. However, defying everyone's expectations, Shifeng shook his head. Guild leader Black Flame, are you intent on mutual destruction? Three Autumn's expression twisted slightly. As a peerless expert of God's domain and a Vice Alliance master of the Fire Dragon Adventurer Alliance, it was already unbelievable that he was taking the initiative to admit defeat. He never thought that Shifeng was actually a lunatic. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Meanwhile, upon seeing that Shifeng refused to back off, Elven Enchantress snarled, Black Flame, you'd better not go too far. You should know that we also represent the superpowers backing us this time. If you annihilate our teams, those superpowers definitely won't let you off the hook. Zero Wing won't be able to bear the consequences. What you say is correct. Shifeng nodded. He then shifted his gaze to Elven Enchantress. However, you've made one mistake. Mistake? Shifeng's words puzzled Three Autumns. He couldn't figure out how he had misspoken. The next moment, Shifeng unsheathed the abyssal blade. Immediately, the intensity of the aura he exuded increased several-fold. With him as the center, all mana within a 1,000-yard radius started to roil, and even the air trembled. And that is the difference in strength. Chapter 27:10, Selection Battle ends. As soon as Shifeng finished speaking, everyone present could clearly sense that the space around them had changed completely. To be precise, the surrounding space had become hostile to them. The heavy pressure the surrounding space subjected their bodies to felt like they were standing in a supergravity area. They even had trouble moving their bodies. On the other hand, as the lord of this space, Shifeng could exert boundless strength with every one of his movements. Not good. A domain. This is a mana domain. Many of the 4 opposing teams' experts instantly realized what was going on when they experienced this feeling of having their lives in someone else's hands. The expressions of Three Autumns, Elven Enchantress, and Mad Sword also turned unprecedentedly grim. Any player who had been mingling in God's domain for some time would know what a mana domain was. It also determined whether an NPC was a powerhouse. Every NPC that wielded a mana domain was an existence that players had to be wary of. After all, many of these NPCs could turn Tier 3 players into dust just by relying on their mana domains. They wouldn't even need to move their bodies. Why does he have a mana domain? Shouldn't that be something only a small minority of Tier 4 NPCs possess? Elven Enchantress panicked. Now, when she looked at Shifeng, her eyes no longer contained any anger, only fear. This was a mana domain they were talking about. With the emergence of this domain, Shifeng had basically become the ruler of this space. How is this possible? 3 Autumns was stunned by this situation, his heart churning with confusion. Is he really not a player but a transformed monster? It might be fine if Shifeng only possessed absurd strength. At worst, they could use Zerg tactics to overwhelm his stamina and concentration. A mana domain, however, was a different story. A mana domain specifically countered Zerg tactics. If an individual stepped into a hostile mana domain without sufficient strength, they would be no different from ants before the domain's owner. They might not even be able to display any combat power. Moreover, the mana domain Shifeng revealed was simply outrageous, covering a 1,000-yard radius. With such a range, they couldn't flee even if they wanted to. At this moment, let alone 3 Autumns and the other hostile players, even Yan Tianxing and the other members of Zero Wing's upper echelon were stunned. The guild leader's strength has already reached such a height? Yan Tianxing gawked at Shifeng, who currently stood proudly among the crowd of great experts. With such strength, it wouldn't matter even if the 4 opposing teams ganged up on Shifeng simultaneously. He could quickly dispatch these people with a few swings of his sword. Only peerless experts like 3 Autumns, who possessed exceptional basic attributes, could put up some resistance, a very laughable resistance, because 3 Autumns and the others wouldn't even manage to match an ordinary Tier 3 expert inside Shifeng's mana domain. Meanwhile, with Shifeng's strength, he could easily dispose of ordinary Tier 3 experts, even without his mana domain's strengthening properties. At this time, the spectating foreign aid teams outside Shifeng's mana domain also panicked. Those 4 teams are dead for sure. With such a vast mana domain, they can't escape, Sorrowful Heaven said, his heart filled with complicated feelings as he looked at 3 Autumns and the others. A joint team made up of 4 peerless experts and several hundred Tier 3 great experts was an incredibly powerful force, even in the Fire Dragon Empire. Nobody would dare oppose it. Now, however, such a team could only wait to die. Boss Sorrow, what should we do now? A level 117 Tier 3 assassin asked helplessly. With just a thought, Zero Wing could decide the fate of the 4 foreign aid teams opposing it, what more the fate of their small team. Escape. Sorrowful Heaven replied instinctively as he looked at the gray space ahead of him. Although their team currently had no enmity with Zero Wing, the Flower of 7 Sins had come into conflict with Zero Wing several times in the past. If Shifeng was in a bad mood, he might decide to take care of them in passing. Escape. Looking at the special space around them, the Tier 3 assassin asked anxiously, "But boss, where do we escape to? This area isn't particularly big. It won't take more than half an hour to run a lap here." The special space used to host the preliminary selections might be considered large for ordinary Tier 3 experts. However, it was essentially a small cage for domain realm experts. Shifeng could easily reap the lives of the people in this cage at any time. Forfeit. Everyone forfeit immediately. Sorrowful Heaven ordered, gnashing his teeth. Players weren't required to fight to the death in the selection battle. If a participant didn't wish to die, they could take the initiative to forfeit. However, forfeiting had a 1-minute channeling process. Moreover, so long as players forfeited during the selection, not only would they automatically lose a level, but they also couldn't log into God's domain for 1 natural day. Hence, unless absolutely necessary, nobody would choose to forfeit. However, Sorrowful Heaven couldn't care less about the penalty for forfeiting under the circumstances. Compared to getting killed by Shifeng and losing 5 levels and being forced to remain offline for several days, forfeiting was a much better option. At this time, besides the Flower of 7 Sins' team, the other foreign aid teams that didn't attack Zero Wing also promptly forfeited their participation rights. For a time, hundreds of light pillars rose inside the special space, creating a magnificent spectacle as if heaven was descending to earth. Unfortunately, only a handful of people inside the special space were in the mood to admire this beautiful scene. Flame Dragon City. As the competition for the 6 reserve seats still hadn't officially begun, the plaza outside the War God's Temple was crowded with the various superpowers experts. Many of these experts chatted quietly about the preliminary selection currently underway. I heard 9 superpowers are participating in the foreign aid selection this time. I wonder which superpower will have the most players remaining? It would be great if our guild can have more people passing the selection. That would significantly ease our burden afterward. I'm afraid not many of our helpers will pass the selection. I just heard that the Sky Dragon family, Pride Empire, Demon Palace, and Miracle recruited 4 of the Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes. With these peerless experts around, trying to hold on to a war god order will be incredibly difficult. Aren't those 4 guilds a little too strong? They actually managed to recruit 4 absolutes? What kind of price did they pay? Although foreign aid won't be particularly helpful in the official competition, each one can still secure half as many points as an official guild member. The opportunity to recruit a peerless expert as a helper is worth any price. After all, that is equivalent to having an extra peerless expert in the guild. At the mention of peerless experts, many of the players in the plaza reflexively turned to look at the members of the Sky Dragon family, Pride Empire, Demon Palace, and Miracle in envy. After all, a guild's foundation largely depended on the number of apex experts and peerless experts they possessed. Moreover, in this competition for the reserve seats, having even one additional peerless expert would be of significant help. At this time, the various superpowers' upper echelons resting inside the War God's temple were also filled with envy and anger. How did they manage to recruit 4 of the 6 absolutes? We clearly offered them astronomical prices before, yet they still declined. I never thought they would agree to help those 4 guilds. With this, we'll be placed in an even tighter spot for manpower. Mushin revealed an ugly expression when she read the report she just received. The matter of Zero Wings data getting exposed had already placed Frost Heaven in a disadvantageous position. Now, 4 guilds had managed to recruit peerless experts to assist them. This was basically rubbing salt into an open wound. It seems these 4 guilds will be occupying most of the foreign aid slots this time. We'll definitely be in a very unfavorable position later on. Brilliant Blue also wore a somber expression on his face. Frost Heaven was already inferior to the other superpowers in terms of the number of peak experts and apex experts, to begin with. Hence, they had placed their hopes on their foreign aid to make up for the difference. However, this hope was growing slimmer and slimmer. Hong Xinyuan also remained silent. He never imagined that the preliminary selection would be so intense, with even 4 of the Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes taking the stage. No matter what, let's look at the results before we make any adjustments, Seven Wonders said. Aside from Frost Heaven, the other superpowers were also panicking. They never thought that the Sky Dragon family, Pride Empire, Demon Palace, and Miracle would become the selection battle's biggest winners. As for the 4 guilds in question, they basked in a moment of delight, feeling that the price they paid to hire the 4 absolutes was well worth it. Now, all they had to do was wait for the selection battle to end and the results to be announced. Those 4 guilds were really cautious in their actions. Even we have just received news that they invited 4 of the 6 absolutes. Vice Guild Leader, I'm afraid we might have to change our plans afterward, White Feather said with a frown as she read the latest report. Although the addition of 4 peerless experts wouldn't affect Mythology's overall situation, she still disliked such variables. The Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes? The corners of Cold Shadow's lips curved up when she heard this. With this, even Black Flame will have trouble surviving. Previously, when she heard of the 4 superpowers' plan to suppress Zero Wing, she still felt relatively uneasy. She had seen Shifeng's strength and tricks before. Killing him would be incredibly difficult. However, with 4 peerless experts added to the equation, combined with the special spaces restrictions, Shifeng's death was just about guaranteed. As the various superpowers' upper echelons were predicting the selection battle's results, a bell suddenly tolled, the sound echoing throughout the War God's temple. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This bell represented the end of the selection battle. What's going on? The selection battle is over? Didn't it just start? Did the War God's temple make a mistake? That shouldn't be the case. Let's go take a look. The selection battle's abrupt end confused the various superpowers' upper echelons. They hastened to the War God's temple's central hall to find out what had happened. Chapter 27:11, Lucky Zero Wing? War God's Temple's Central Hall. In response to the bell signaling the preliminary selection's end, the various superpowers' upper echelons quickly gathered in the normally deserted Central Hall. In just a few moments, players filled 1/3 of the hall, which was the size of half a football field. The selection battle began less than 10 minutes ago, Yet the ending bell already rang. Did the selection's rules change? That shouldn't be the case. The rules were verified before the competition. But it ended in less than 10 minutes. I doubt anyone can do anything in such a short time, right? The various superpowers' upper echelons curiously discussed the selection battle's abrupt end. All of them wanted to know why the selection ended so soon. Amid the various discussions, a huge teleportation array appeared in the middle of the hall. A moment later, a stone stele emerged from the magic array. The appearance of the stele instantly attracted the various superpowers' attention. This was especially true for the 9 superpowers that had recruited foreign aid. This was because the 9 superpowers' names were gradually appearing on the stele. The announcement of the number of players that passed the selection for each guild was evidently forthcoming. What? The results are actually out so soon. I wonder which guild will have the most helpers? If anyone can get over 20 official foreign aid slots, it would be of significant help in the official competition. According to the information we received, Miracle should have the best odds. After all, they recruited Elven Enchantress. She's top-notch when it comes to long-range sniping and sneak attacks. She can easily snipe the War God Order holders. Also, compared to the 5 other absolutes, her attacks are the trickiest to block. The various superpowers' upper echelons excitedly made conjectures as they watched the words slowly appear on the stele. On the other hand, Frost Heaven's members grew nervous. According to the intelligence they secretly acquired, Frost Heaven's overall strength could only be considered average. If they lacked sufficient foreign aid, they would most likely lose all hope of gaining one of the 6 reserve seats. The official competition for the reserve seats would be a struggle for land and resources. The greater the number of powerful experts one had, the more advantageous one's position. After a guild occupied a resource node, it would acquire a resource emblem. And when a player wore the resource emblem, so long as they did not leave the node's range, the guild they belonged to would continually earn guild points. Hence, the player wearing the resource emblem had to be incredibly strong. Otherwise, it would be very easy for other guilds' experts to ambush and kill the emblem holder. 10. Just 10 people is fine. Mushin prayed quietly as she looked at the monument. She didn't place much hope in having many of their helpers pass the preliminaries. She only hoped that Frost Heaven's foreign aid count did not lag behind the other superpowers. 10. She sure knows how to dream. 1,000 Miles, a vice guild leader of Miracle, sneered when he overheard Mushin's mutterings from nearby. It's a pity she invited Zero Wing. This dream of hers will never come true. Miles, you've gone too far this time. I only told you to instruct Elven Enchantress and the other 3 guilds to suppress Zero Wing. Yet, you actually told them to annihilate Frost Heaven's other helpers after eliminating Zero Wing. Shredded Soul, Miracle's first vice guild leader, berated while shaking his head. If Frost Heaven's people find out about this, they'll definitely create a lot of trouble for us in the future. We're going to have to reduce the other guilds' foreign aid count anyway. It doesn't matter even if we have Frost Heaven suffer slightly greater losses. It's Frost Heaven's fault for seeking Zero Wing's help to begin with, 1,000 Miles countered contemptuously. He bore a massive grudge against Zero Wing. It was all because of Zero Wing that his status in the guild had repeatedly fallen. He naturally wouldn't let go of an opportunity to take revenge. In fact, to deal with Zero Wing, he had taken the initiative to persuade the guild to partner with Saint's Hand and collaborate with the 3 other guilds to take action together. At this time, Cold Shadow couldn't help looking at the distant Mushin with sympathy from a corner of the hall. If not for Zero Wing, Frost Heaven wouldn't have fallen into such a passive state, Cold Shadow sighed ruefully. Under normal circumstances, Mushin's decision to recruit Shifeng as foreign aid would have been a good one. Unfortunately, aside from being strong, Shifeng also didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He had simply made far too many enemies. Otherwise, Miracle wouldn't have decided to take action against Zero Wing so decisively, going as far as to ignore Frost Heaven's influence. While the various superpowers members were discussing excitedly, several flashes of light appeared above the central teleportation array. In the blink of an eye, 17 figures appeared before everyone's eyes. As the teleportation array's brilliance dissipated, the appearance of these 17 figures became clear for all to see. They were none other than Zero Wing's members, whom the various superpowers felt would fail the preliminary selection. How is this possible? Aren't they way too lucky? Did they not encounter any other foreign aid teams inside? For a time the hall was in an uproar. None of the various superpowers members could believe their eyes. This was especially true for the Sky Dragon families, Pride Empires, Demon Palaces and Miracle's upper echelons. Every one of them gaped at this situation. Why are Zero Wings members still alive? Thousand Miles was bewildered when he saw Shifeng's group walking out of the teleportation array. At this moment, let alone Thousand Miles, even Shredded Soul and the distant Cold Shadow were puzzled by this situation. After all, nobody knew better than they did the situation inside the special space. Those were 400 great experts they were talking about. Of them, 4 were even peerless experts and over a dozen were apex experts. With such a force, one could roam unhindered even in the Fire Dragon Empire. Taking care of Zero Wing should have been child's play. Yet, Zero Wing actually exited the battlefield with 0 casualties. How could they possibly bring themselves to believe this situation? Did those 4 absolutes not go after them? No matter how Cold Shadow racked her brain, this was the only possibility she could think of for Zero Wing emerging unscathed. Frost Heaven's members were also surprised at this situation. They sure are lucky. They actually managed to come out unscathed even in such a situation. When Brilliant Blue saw Shifeng and the others, he shot a glance at Hong Xinyun then continued, however, just returning alive is useless. In the end it will still depend on whether they acquired any War God orders. In Brilliant Blue's opinion, Shifeng's group must have deliberately avoided the other foreign aid teams and did not fight any battles at all. Hence, they were able to return safely. Otherwise, with Zero Wing's exposed data, there was no way the other foreign aid teams wouldn't target Zero Wing's members. In the end, the various participating superpowers present only treated the return of Zero Wing's members as a small interlude. What they were really concerned about was the issue of how many foreign aid slots each of them would receive. Everyone returned their attention to the teleportation array in the middle of the hall, waiting for someone else to return, so that they could inquire about the War God Order's distribution. However, after Shifeng's group left the teleportation array, the various superpowers members were dumbfounded. The teleportation array that should have continued teleporting other people back to the War God's temple actually started disappearing. What's going on? Why did the teleportation array stop teleporting people? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Could it be broken? Questions emerged in everyone's mind one after another. None of them could figure out what was going on. The hall devolved into pandemonium because of this situation. However, after a short while, the entire central hall fell into a deathly silence. The line of text that appeared at the top of the stele rendered everyone in the hall speechless with shock. Preliminary selection participant count, 900, passing count, 17. Chapter 27:12, Arrogant Person Exodus Tales Chapter 27:12 Arrogant Person. Only 17 people passed the selection? Zero Wing's team seems to have 17 people. What exactly is going on here? After a brief silence, the various superpowers members turned their eyes toward Shifeng's group, the doubt in their hearts deepening. There was indeed the possibility that the War God orders had been well hidden, and some might not be found even after the selection ended. This would result in less than 100 people passing the preliminary selection. However, even if that were the case, over 80 people should still have passed the selection. However, only 17 people had passed the selection. This number was far below the various superpowers' expectations. The upper echelons of Sky Dragon Family, Pride Empire, Demon Palace and Miracle in particular, were dumbfounded by this situation. They couldn't figure out what exactly had happened inside the selection battle. Their 4 guilds had paid an enormous price to recruit 4 of the Fire Dragon Empire's 6 absolutes. They had been very confident of winning the preliminary selection, hands down. Now, however, let alone ranking within the top 4, not even one of the foreign aid they recruited managed to pass the selection. What was even more unbelievable was the fact that Zero Wing's members had returned unscathed. How could they possibly believe this? Investigate. Investigate what happened. I want to know what happened inside the selection battle. Almost immediately, the 4 guilds' upper echelons began frantically contacting their respective foreign aid team's members. Vice Guild Leader, did something go wrong with the selection? Whitefeather's eyes brimmed with surprise and confusion as she looked at the central stele. In response to Whitefeather's question, Cold Shadow glanced at the distant Shifeng before looking toward the 4 guilds' side. From the commotion at the 4 guilds, it was evident that even the 4 guilds people didn't know what had just happened. Something must have gone wrong. Only I don't know what kind of trick Zero Wing pulled this time. All Cold Shadow could think of now was that Zero Wing was related to this abnormal situation. Out of the 900 players that entered the selection space, only 17 returned. Even if an intense battle occurred inside, there shouldn't be so few players returning. Not to mention, all of these returnees were even Zero Wings members. As the various superpowers were investigating this strange situation, Frostheaven's side was similarly at a loss. Guild leader Black Flame, what happened inside? Why are you the only ones to return? Mushin couldn't help asking Shifeng. Since Shifeng was an insider in this situation, asking him would be much more efficient than asking around. Yes, what happened inside the selection battle? Brilliant Blue questioned. Where are Sorrowful Heaven and the others? If even Zero Wing's small team of 17 could return safely, there was no way the Flower of Seven Sins' team of 83 players couldn't. Not to mention, Sorrowful Rain was a domain realm expert. Following Mushin's and Brilliant Blue's questions, everyone from Frostheaven turned to look at Shifeng, curious to find out what exactly happened inside. However, Shifeng directly ignored Brilliant Blue's question and turned to Mushin. Nothing special happened inside. We just conducted a normal team battle. As for the result, you saw it yourself, Shifeng said calmly. Shifeng's words were clear and straightforward. His logic was also seamless. However, none of Frostheaven's members believed him. Even Mushin felt that Shifeng was joking with her. Black Flame, do you take this old man for a fool? Do you think I will believe such words? Brilliant Blue was incensed. He already felt upset that Shifeng ignored him. Now Shifeng was even insulting his intelligence by giving such a stupid answer. The other Frostheaven members agreed with Brilliant Blue's words, and they started looking at Shifeng with scorn. Although Shifeng's answer sounded reasonable, it was also the least possible result. They would be fools to believe him. 900 Tier 3 experts had participated in the preliminary selection, many of them peak experts and apex experts. No matter how fierce the battle, these experts shouldn't have all gotten annihilated. After all, they could still flee if they couldn't win in a fight. Moreover, the selection battle was held in a special space that severely restricted a player's stamina and concentration. The difficulty and risks involved in chasing a fleeing opponent in this space were incredibly high. Meanwhile, Shifeng's team was not only the smallest out of the bunch but also the easiest to counter. If an intense battle occurred during the selection, Shifeng's team should have faced the greatest difficulty returning alive. But what about now? Not only did Zero Wing's team suffer 0 casualties, but Zero Wing's members all wore incomparably relaxed expressions. They did not look like they had just survived an intense battle at all but gone on an outing. Whether you believe it or not is up to you, Shifeng retorted nonchalantly. The selection battle is over. If you don't have any other questions, we'll be heading back to rest. After saying so, Shifeng turned around and left the hall, unconcerned whether Frostheaven's members believed him or not. His goal in coming here was only the 3 upper zone reserve slots. Meanwhile, after glancing at the Frostheaven contingent, Zero Wing's other members chuckled before following Shifeng out of the hall. The behavior of Zero Wing's team thoroughly dumbfounded Brilliant Blue. He was one of Frostheaven's dignified Frost Pillars as well as a great elder of the guild. Yet now he was being ignored by the guild leader of a pseudo-superpower with no background whatsoever. Brilliant Blue promptly glared at Hong Xinyun and bellowed angrily, "Hong Xinyun, take a good look. This is the trump card you recruited." However, Hong Xinyun remained indifferent to Brilliant Blue's outburst. In fact, he was in a relatively good mood. After all, the return of Shifeng's team meant that Frostheaven had gained 17 foreign aid slots. Failing to get a reaction out of Hong Xinyun, Brilliant Blue turned to Seven Wonders and snapped, "Guild leader, you've seen how Zero Wing's members behave. They are too arrogant. They aren't even taking us seriously. If we let them participate in the official competition, the consequences will be disastrous." "Enough. Let's take a look at the situation first," Seven Wonders berated. However, when Seven Wonders glanced at Zero Wing's members' departing figures, a hint of dissatisfaction also flashed in his eyes. Meanwhile, although Shifeng had spoken in a normal tone, everyone in the hall was a great expert. Even the weakest among them was at the flowing water realm. Hence, they heard Shifeng's words loud and clear. Black Flame truly is arrogant to the extreme. He's taking such an attitude even toward Frostheaven. He'll most likely have a difficult path ahead of him. White Feather smirked when she saw the exchange between Shifeng and Frostheaven's leadership. However, Black Flame really knows how to spout nonsense. Does he think his team consists entirely of peerless experts? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. While Frostheaven's members might be unaware, she knew full well that nearly half of the 900 players who participated in the selection battle had set their sights on Zero Wing. Zero Wing shouldn't have come out unscathed if a battle truly happened. However, even after White Feather ridiculed Shifeng a bunch, Cold Shadow remained surprisingly silent. Vice Guild Leader, is something wrong? White Feather asked in confusion when she noticed Cold Shadow's solemn expression. News just came from our insider. Taking a deep breath, Cold Shadow said slowly, all participating foreign aides were annihilated. Chapter 27:13 Fame spreads across the Fire Dragon Empire. When White Feather heard Cold Shadow's words, she was stunned, her brain seizing up momentarily. How is this possible? White Feather exclaimed almost instinctively. The selection lasted less than 10 minutes. How could nearly 900 Tier 3 great experts slaughter each other so thoroughly within that time? Without a large gap in strength, a fight between Tier 3 experts would take at least 2 to 5 minutes to finish. This rule of thumb was already widely accepted in God's domain. Upon reaching Tier 3, almost every player would have at least a few life-saving skills. They could easily fight a battle of attrition. Hence, there was a popular saying that while Tier 3 experts could be defeated easily, killing them was challenging. No, they didn't fight each other. Cold Shadow shook her head. She then added calmly, according to our insider, over half of the foreign aid teams chose to forfeit. Forfeit? White Feather grew even more confused at this revelation. She felt that the more she delved into this matter, the more incomprehensible it became. Meanwhile, inside the gloomy hall, 1,000 Miles and the upper echelons of the many superpowers present also received news on what happened during the selection battle. They were inevitably bewildered. Have they lost their minds? Over half of them forfeited. 1,000 Miles cursed out loud when he saw his subordinates report. Investigate immediately. Anyone who chose to forfeit shouldn't even think of receiving any of the promised benefits. With the huge numerical advantage they had, they could have annihilated Zero Wing's members even if they had to throw bodies at them. Vice Guild Leader Miles. The gray-robed berserker standing before 1,000 Miles shrank back slightly before saying quietly, the ones that forfeited aren't our guild's foreign aid. What happened to our foreign aid then? 1,000 Miles asked in response. Our foreign aid? After peeking at 1,000 Miles, the gray-robed berserker answered hesitantly, Black Flame killed them all. Moreover, he didn't kill just our foreign aid but also the other 3 guilds' foreign aid. Are you sure Black Flame did it alone? Are they not messing with you? 1,000 Miles asked in disbelief. I've verified with them already. The gray-robed berserker nodded. Black Flame indeed killed them by himself. Out of the 400 players that targeted Zero Wing, not a single one survived. Alone? He annihilated all 400 Tier 3 great experts? 1,000 Miles suddenly felt a little dizzy. This information was too much for his brain to process. He even felt that he was hallucinating right now. According to the foreign aid teams, Black Flame already possesses a mana domain. The range and strength of his mana domain are also unprecedented. Tier 3 experts can't exert even 10% of their combat power while inside it. Just moving their bodies is a challenging task, the berserker reported after summoning up his courage. Not only did a player obtain a mana domain, but said mana domain was even so powerful. If someone had told him such a thing before, even he would consider that person crazy. Either that or this person was a newcomer in God's domain and ignorant about mana domains. A mana domain? 1,000 Miles' expression stiffened at this term. How can he have a mana domain? At this time, 1,000 Miles wasn't the only person dumbfounded. The other superpowers' upper echelons were similarly bewildered when they heard this piece of news. After all, it was far more unbelievable than Shifeng's feat of single-handedly annihilating 4 foreign aid teams. In God's domain, the mana domain was the standard that determined whether an NPC was strong or weak. So long as an NPC had a mana domain, they would be considered a true powerhouse in the whole of God's domain. After Frost Heaven's members received a detailed report of what happened during the selection battle, they too fell silent. Brilliant Blue in particular, wore an extremely wrinkled and ugly look on his face. Previously, no one from Frost Heaven believed what Shifeng had said. In their opinion, Shifeng was only talking big. Brilliant Blue had even mocked Shifeng for his arrogance. However, insiders were now telling them that everything was true. Moreover, the situation was far more terrifying than how Shifeng described it. Old Hong, did you and Muxi know about this since the beginning? 7 Wonders couldn't help asking Hong Xinyuan. We knew a little. Chuckling, Hong Xinyuan added, however, for confidentiality's sake, we didn't tell anyone. Mushin also nodded in agreement. Only even she was surprised by such an excellent battle record. She never expected that Shifeng's mana domain would be so powerful when released. It was at least 10 times stronger than what she experienced. You two really know how to keep us in the dark. When Seven Wonders looked at Hong Xinyuan's indifferent expression and recalled the situation with Shifeng before, he smiled bitterly. In that case, I'll leave Zero Wings matters to you in the future. After glancing at the silent brilliant blue, Hong Xinyuan faintly smiled and said, Guild leader, please rest assured. After the end of the selection battle, news about Zero Wing spread like the plague. This was especially true for the details regarding Black Flame. Many of the major powers that had come to spectate the competition were shocked. Not only had Black Flame single-handedly dominated the preliminary selection, but he even possessed the rumored mana domain. This battle record instantly made Black Flame the focus of discussion for many players all over the Fire Dragon Empire. Quite a number of the Empire's players even sought to join the pseudo-superpower known as Zero Wing. War God's Temple Mythology's Lounge, Vice Guild Leader, the situation has become somewhat troublesome now. Not only does that Black Flame possess a mana domain, but his fame has also spread throughout the Fire Dragon Empire. I'm afraid it'll become very difficult to realize our acquisition plan now, White Feather said anxiously when she saw that Black Flame's name was being mentioned everywhere in the Fire Dragon Empire's forums. This situation might even affect Miracle's ranking. Mythology had chosen to partner with Miracle for the competition this time. In terms of guild foundations and strength, Miracle was above Frost Heaven. However, not only did Miracle lose all its foreign aid, but Frost Heaven even had Zero Wing supporting it. The gap in strength between the two guilds had instantly narrowed by a large margin. Black Flame has indeed become a big variable now. Glancing at the battle report she received, Cold Shadow smiled and added, however, at the end of the day the struggle for the reserve seats isn't something that can be decided by one person. Not to mention, even with a mana domain, Black Flame won't be able to survive for long in this competition. That great personage has already said he would personally take action against Black Flame. That great personage is going to make a move? This news surprised White Feather. Black Flame still thinks he is invincible just because he has a mana domain. He doesn't know that there is always someone stronger. Even a mana domain cannot save him now, Cold Shadow sneered as she read the detailed report on Shifeng. While a mana domain was indeed powerful, it was a negligible existence in front of absolute strength. While the various superpowers were patiently waiting for the official competition to begin, Shifeng secretly paid a visit to a bar called Moonfire in Flame Dragon City's outskirts. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. At this time, only one woman was sitting quietly at the bar counter. This woman wore delicate light blue robes, and just the view of her back could mesmerize countless people. However, this woman's aura was as hot as flames, deterring people from summoning up the courage to approach her. You're here. When the woman saw Shifeng enter the bar, she greeted him as though welcoming an old friend she hadn't seen for a long time. Meanwhile, this woman was none other than the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's Phoenix Pavilion Master, Demon Queen Phoenix Rain. Chapter 27:14, Meeting Phoenix Rain again. Accepting Phoenix Rain's invitation, Shifeng walked over and sat beside her. In the time I haven't seen you, you've become a lot stronger again, Phoenix Rain praised as she scanned Shifeng. Not too much. Going straight into the topic, Shifeng asked, is everything alright on your side? He had suddenly visited the Moonfire bar because of a message from Phoenix Rain. Initially he had been a little happy to receive the message. Since he had thought that Phoenix Rain would never appear before him again, he felt that the situation shouldn't be as terrible as Duan Han made it out to be. However, the moment he laid eyes on Phoenix Rain he instantly understood. The situation was much worse than he thought. This was because the Phoenix Rain he saw couldn't be considered human. All her information was labeled as unknown, and couldn't be examined at all. Moreover, the feeling he got from her was as if she had wholly integrated her existence with the flowers and trees of God's domain. Shifeng even got the impression that Phoenix Rain was native to God's domain. Meanwhile, at Shifeng's question, a hint of surprise flashed in Phoenix Rain's eyes. She then smiled faintly and replied, you can say that it's alright yet not alright at the same time. It seems the situation still isn't too terrible. Shifeng nodded. He then asked another question, can you tell me what exactly happened then? The disappearance of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's 3 pavilion masters had shaken the various superpowers of God's domain. If not for the pavilion having hidden this matter well, it would have long since made headlines in the real world. This I cannot say. Phoenix Rain shook her head. I went to great lengths to come here to tell you only two things. Although Phoenix Rain's voice was calm, her eyes betrayed deep exhaustion. What is it? Shifeng didn't probe too much into her situation. He could feel that Phoenix Rain wasn't joking with him. In that case, there wouldn't be any meaning for him to continue probing. The first is that I hope you can take care of my little sister, Phoenix Rain said, then took out an information card and handed it to Shifeng. Her information and address are recorded here. I'm no longer by her side. Although she has great abilities, the people who are troubling her are difficult. If you have the chance, I hope you can help resolve her problems. After glancing at the information card, Shifeng was stunned. Phoenix Rain's little sister was residing in the upper zone. Aren't you in the upper zone too? Shifeng asked in confusion. I'm in the upper zone? Phoenix Rain was surprised by this piece of news. Afterward, as if reacting to something, she chuckled and said, That's right. I guess you can say that. However, I'm afraid it will be difficult for me to meet her right now. I can only hope you will help her. I can't trust anyone else for this. This shouldn't be a problem. I'll go take a look if I visit the upper zone in the future. Shifeng nodded in agreement. Phoenix Rain had helped both him and Zero Wing a lot thus far. He didn't mind taking care of her little sister now. Thank you. Phoenix Rain breathed out a sigh of relief when she heard Shifeng's answer. She then inhaled deeply before saying solemnly, Next, the second matter will be my 2 pieces of advice to you. Advice. Seeing Phoenix Rain's serious expression, Shifeng couldn't help asking, Is it Saint's hand? Based on the information from Duan Han's Han, the disappearance of the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's leadership had something to do with Saint's hand. Moreover, the various superpowers also appeared to be fearful of the guild. No. Shaking her head, Phoenix Rain said, My first advice is for you to be wary of 3 people. 3 people? Shifeng was somewhat confused. He could understand if Phoenix Rain wanted him to be wary of some powerful organization, yet she told him to be wary of 3 individuals. If not for Phoenix Rain's solemn expression and her lofty status, he would have most likely treated her words as a joke. Yes, 3 people. Slowly, Phoenix Rain said, I don't know these 3 people's names. They use various aliases, but not one of them is their real name. The only thing I can tell you is their characteristics. These 3 people are a madman, a girl, and a young, scholarly person. If you meet them, run as far as you can. Never approach them or the consequences will be harsh. You must remember this point. That's all the information on these 3 people? Shifeng memorized Phoenix Rain's words, but the information he had to work with was scanty and vague. I only know this much. Phoenix Rain shook her head and chuckled. She then continued, The next piece of advice is simpler, and that is to stock up on as many 7 luminaries crystals as possible. This thing is incredibly valuable and the more you have, the better. That's a realistic piece of advice. Shifeng was startled to receive this advice. 7 luminaries crystal was incredibly important during his previous life. Knowing this, he had tasked many guild members with finding and collecting the crystal. However, due to its rarity, the amount they managed to collect wasn't significant. After Shifeng finished speaking, Phoenix Rain suddenly stood up and tossed 3 gold coins onto the table. She then looked at Shifeng and said earnestly, I've said everything that can be said. How far you can progress will be up to you. You're leaving already? Shifeng was again startled when he saw Phoenix Rain preparing to leave. Their conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. He hadn't even gotten to the other questions he wanted to ask. However, Phoenix Rain looked to be short on time. Oh yes. Suddenly, Phoenix Rain pulled out a black crystal from her pocket and tossed it to Shifeng. I have you to thank for being able to make this visit. I can't use this thing at present, so I'll give it to you. What is this thing? When Shifeng looked at the unidentifiable black crystal, he felt a sudden urge to eat the crystal whole. Upon noticing the hunger in Shifeng's eyes, Phoenix Rain chuckled. You better not eat it. It's not edible. Shifeng felt slightly embarrassed by this situation. He never thought that the black crystal would be powerful enough to affect his mind. Don't worry. I won't eat it, Shifeng promised. Before I go, I'll tell you one more thing. Tier 4 is just the beginning. Your time? However, before Phoenix Rain could finish speaking, she suddenly disappeared. It was as if she never existed in this place. Now, only Shifeng remained inside the spacious bar. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU forced teleportation? Surprise colored Shifeng's eyes as he looked at the space where Phoenix Rain had been. However, he quickly denied his conjecture. No. There were no spatial fluctuations. It shouldn't be a forced teleport. Yet if she logged off, it should have taken a while before she disappeared. Despite pondering for some time, Shifeng failed to figure out the mechanism behind Phoenix Rain's sudden disappearance. In the end, he had to give up and shifted his attention to the black crystal in his hand. At least he now knew that Phoenix Rain was safe. I got nothing from using an ordinary identification skill just now. It seems I can only try with omniscient eyes. Taking a deep breath, Shifeng gathered the surrounding mana around his eyes and stared intently at the black crystal. Omniscient eyes. Chapter 27:15 Eternal Item. As Shifeng frantically gathered mana inside the bar, the mana around him started liquefying. The standard of his mana was undoubtedly at tier 4. A moment later, twofold magic arrays appeared in his eyes. If a player were to meet his gaze right now, they would most likely shudder instinctively. At this moment, Shifeng's eyes seemed to be capable of penetrating all truths in the world. No secrets could exist before this pair of eyes. Sure enough, Omniscient Eyes' effects have improved significantly now that my mana has reached the tier 4 standard. Shifeng was delighted as he looked at the black crystal in his hand. Previously, even when he used the advanced identification skill, he couldn't appraise the black crystal at all. However, with Omniscient Eyes, a loading bar had appeared. It was as if the black crystal's outermost firewall had cracked, and the skill was fervently exploiting this breach and trying to dig into the crystal's core. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 40 seconds. As the forces of the black crystal and Omniscient Eyes continued clashing, Shifeng frowned. Although Omniscient Eyes has the strength to contend against the black crystal, it apparently still isn't enough. Omniscient Eyes might be digging at the black crystal's firewalls, but the skill had a limited duration of only 1 minute. If it failed to break through the black crystal's defenses during this time, he would have to try again 10 minutes later. Only the result would most likely be the same. Upon seeing Omniscient Eyes and the black crystal at a stalemate, Shifeng started racking his brain on how he could break through the black crystal's power. The biggest difference between tier 3 and tier 4 is in mana. Since Omniscient Eyes has the strength to go up against the black crystal after being injected with tier 4 mana, the difference between the two is mana. As of now, Omniscient Eyes still has plentiful mana. In other words, the amount of mana isn't crucial for breaking through the black crystal's defenses. If the amount isn't the problem, then the only other possibility is the mana's strength. However, after coming to this conclusion, Shifeng did not smile in joy. On the contrary, he fell into even greater despair. After all, increasing the strength of mana was easier said than done. On the market, almost all items that improved their users' mana only increased the volume of mana their users held. Generally, if players wished to increase their mana's quality, they would have to either improve their control over mana or raise their tier. In other words, if Shifeng wanted to increase his mana strength right now, his only option was to raise his control over mana to a higher realm. No, that's not the only option. Shifeng shook his head. An increase in the mana strength also represents an increase in the skill's power. Increasing the skill's power would be equivalent to improving the mana strength. After Shifeng thought up to this point, a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. However, less than 5 seconds remained to Omniscient Eyes' duration. I have no choice but to try. Taking a deep breath, Shifeng unsheathed the abyssal blade and promptly assumed the posture of using the mana technique Light Shadow. The mana swarming around Shifeng instantly began condensing even further, taking on the shape of a greatsword. However, unlike when he used this mana technique at tier 3, the phantom greatsword now looked much more tangible. Meanwhile, after executing Light Shadow, Shifeng could sense a change occurring in the magic arrays in his eyes. They showed faint signs of evolving into threefold magic arrays. Good. It's effective. Shifeng couldn't help growing excited. However, the third layer's formation abruptly stopped. The mana still isn't strong enough? Shifeng frowned. If I want to increase it even further, I'll have no choice but to use Holy Devour. Holy Devour was a move he dreaded to use. Executing the complete Holy Devour was too taxing. It shouldn't be used frequently, even by tier 4 classes. With the reserve seats competition about to begin, he had to keep himself in his peak state. Although executing Holy Devour once wouldn't overwork his brain, it would still exhaust his concentration. However, after thinking for a second, Shifeng gritted his teeth and threw caution to the wind. To hell with it. Although Phoenix Rain currently wasn't in a life-threatening situation, that was true only for now. There were far too many unknowns and secrets surrounding her. Saint's Hand's side was also filled with mysteries. There was no guarantee that he wouldn't meet a similar fate to Phoenix Rain in the future. Hence, he needed to identify the Black Crystal. Only by doing so would he have a chance at finding some useful information. Immediately, Feng changed his stance once more, and the aura he exuded skyrocketed in intensity. Holy Devour. Boom. Suddenly, ethereal flames enveloped the bar. The flames were so realistic that they triggered the magic arrays set up inside the bar. Some of these magic arrays even started cracking, evidently unable to withstand the powerful mana Feng condensed. Meanwhile, as if violently stimulated, the twofold magic arrays in Feng's eyes completed their transformation into threefold magic arrays. Using Holy Devour directly elevated Omniscient Eyes' strength to a whole new level. Crack. Feng suddenly heard a crack coming from the black crystal. However, half a second later, dizziness assaulted his brain. The horrific mana condensed by Holy Devour also instantly dissipated, leaving behind a tattered bar. Several seconds later, his mind started to clear up. He immediately shifted his gaze to the black crystal in his hand. Did it succeed? Feng inspected the black crystal anxiously. This time, the crystal didn't put up any resistance when he tried to read its information. Row after row of text appeared before his eyes. Upon seeing this information, Feng was stunned. An eternal item? This is actually an eternal item? Feng couldn't help doubting his eyes as he read the information before him. World Stone, Eternal Item, Effect 1. Stabilizes the principle of all things. Effect 2. Unknown. Effect 3. Indestructible object. In God's domain, so long as an item was related to eternity, it was an item of God's. Eternal items were legends among legends. According to rumor, even gods had difficulty obtaining one, and some gods would even fight frantically for one. There were various rumors as to the cause of the Great Ancient War, one of which attributed the war to a struggle for eternal items between ancient gods. It seems I still can't do anything about this situation. Feng smiled bitterly as he looked at the World Stone. He had fought for 10 years in God's domain in his previous life. However, he was well aware that he was still ignorant of plenty of secrets regarding God's domain. God's domain wasn't just a game like the general masses thought it to be. Otherwise, the various international corporations wouldn't go so crazy over it. This eternal item told him that the problem Phoenix Rain faced was extraordinary. It wasn't something a Tier 4 Sword Emperor like himself could look into. After all, even the God-ranked experts in his previous life had great difficulty obtaining such an item. He would most likely have to wait until he reached Tier 5 or even Tier 6 before he could find out more about the situation. Otherwise, he would share the fate of all those missing experts. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. While Feng was having goosebumps from thinking about the problem Phoenix Rain was involved in, Yulan suddenly contacted him. Where are you now, guild leader? Yulan asked anxiously. The various superpowers members have already started to gather. Okay, I'll head over now. Feng smiled and nodded. He decided to shelve Phoenix Rain's matter temporarily. Now the only thing he needed to do was improve both his and his guild's strength as much as possible. Only by doing so would he have a better chance of handling the various crises plaguing him. After ending the call, Feng stored the World Stone and dropped a bag of gold coins on the table. He then left the Moonfire Bar. Chapter 27:16 God's Domain's Apex Battle Flame Dragon City, War God's Temple. Despite being the size of 3 sports stadiums, the plaza outside the War God's Temple was currently crowded with players. Aside from the various participating superpowers members, a large portion of these players was here as spectators. Everyone quietly waited for the official start of the competition. Quick look. They're about to announce the battlefield. Suddenly, a huge holographic projection appeared in the sky above the War God's Temple. The projection was hundreds of meters wide, and the image displayed was visible even from several miles away. Meanwhile, with the emergence of this holographic projection, excitement surged in both the players and NPCs in Flame Dragon City. It's finally starting. This competition will determine the future direction of the entire God's domain. Many of the various superpowers' hidden experts will reveal themselves. Once you guys enter the arena, make sure to record these experts' data. They're going to become the giants of God's domain in the future. We must make sure we don't accidentally offend any of them. Newbies, listen up. The guild spent a fortune to reserve a VIP viewing room to let you experience this competition as close as possible. Cherish this opportunity and learn as much as you can from those top talents. The various major powers here to spectate the competition spent time instructing their guild talents and newcomers to cherish this viewing opportunity. After all, this was going to be the apex battle of God's domain. Talents? I want to see just how powerful they are. I heard many of the people on the God's domain's experts list would appear. I wonder if we'll get a chance to see a showdown between these experts? The various major powers' talents and newcomers grew excited upon hearing their superiors' words. They all wished they could take part in the competition themselves. The players in Flame Dragon City weren't the only ones paying attention to this competition. Players all over God's domain were also interested. Unfortunately, the people who could directly spectate the battle numbered very few, which had many players gnashing their teeth in frustration. There were only 100 VIP viewing rooms, each capable of accommodating only 100 players. There were also only 10 million normal viewing seats available. Compared to God's domain's player population, this number was insignificant. However, this still wasn't the most frustrating part. Instead, what frustrated players the most was that aside from players, even NPCs could purchase these viewing tickets. According to the War God's Temple statistics, 20% of the tickets were bought by NPCs, 60% by guilds, and only 20% by independent players. Time passed quickly. Before anyone knew it, the holographic projection above the War God's Temple revealed the battlefield for the upcoming competition. Displayed on the projection was an ocean with turbulent waves and dark thunderclouds. At a glance, it was evident this wasn't a place players could enter casually. Strewn across this ocean were 18 islands of varying sizes. The small islands were roughly the size of small leveling maps, while the large islands were around 3 times the size of the small islands. A considerable distance separated these islands. With calm seas, a bronze speedboat would take at least 2 hours to travel from one island to another. The appearance of waves and storms could double this travel time. What? It's going to be a naval battle? No, there are quite a few islands on the ocean. Is it an island occupation battle? The players outside the War God's Temple were surprised by the unveiled battlefield, and heated discussions promptly broke out. However, before anyone could reach a conclusion, the specific rules for the reserve seat competition were listed one after another. When the players in the plaza saw these rules, they gasped in shock. After all, this competition depended heavily on guild foundations and leadership. The use of individual strength would be greatly restricted in this competition. Moreover, if a guild didn't handle its distribution of teams properly, it might suffer complete annihilation. The rules favor guilds with greater numbers. Mu Lingsha frowned as she gazed at the rules displayed above the War God's Temple. The minimum requirement for players in this competition was Tier 3. Even if most of the participating superpowers had roughly the same number of guild members, there was a huge difference in the number of Tier 3 players. Take Unyielding Soul, for example. The guild had only 4,500 or so Tier 3 players. However, the Super Guild Skydragon family had over 8,000. Of course, the guilds participating in this competition had 6,000 Tier 3 players on average, so the difference between the participating guilds wasn't as significant. Even so, this situation would still create a huge gap between the participating guilds. To begin with, each of the 5 great super guilds had over 20,000 Tier 3 players. This wasn't a number any of the other superpowers could hope to compete with. This was also why none of the other superpowers held any hopes of competing for the 5 other reserve seats. With the revelation of these rules, the gap between the 5 great super guilds and the other participating superpowers became even more significant. For example, the 5 great super guilds could form 21,000-man teams each, whereas the other superpowers couldn't even form 10. And given the random assignment to the various islands, the number of islands the 5 great super guilds could occupy right off the bat would already be several times higher than what the other superpowers could hold. To make matters worse, if a guild couldn't even rank within the top 5 of an island's point ranking, it couldn't leave for other islands to seek greener pastures. These rules are excellent. Miracle's victory is basically sealed now, Cold Shadow said, smiling as she read the competition rules. At this time, Miracle's upper echelon was also ecstatic. After all, Miracle had over 13,000 members participating in the competition this time. As to why the guild could have so many Tier 3 experts, it was thanks entirely to the special tools mythology provided. These tools allowed Tier 2 experts that had trouble with their promotion to overcome the final hurdle. Although these artificially produced Tier 3 experts were lacking in combat standards compared to other Tier 3 experts, they were still bona fide Tier 3 players and much stronger than Tier 2 players. With the addition of these artificial Tier 3 experts, Miracle had the 6th largest player count in this competition. In contrast to Miracle's upper echelon, 7 Wonders and the rest of Frost Heaven's upper echelon currently looked pale. Frost Heaven had only a little over 7,500 members participating. The guild was just barely ranked within the top 10. If not for the competition venue and rules, Frost Heaven could have easily fought for the 6th seat. Now, however, it was evident this wouldn't be possible. Our only choice is to take the risk and form more teams. Otherwise, we won't have a chance of securing a seat, 7 Wonders stated calmly to the elders and grand elders present. That's the only thing we can do. Otherwise, we won't stand a chance against the guilds with greater numbers, Hong Xinyuan said, nodding in agreement. The grand elders and elders present similarly agreed with 7 Wonders' opinion. Since that's the case, I'll start assigning the teams. Although we have to split our numbers into as many teams as possible, we also need to consider the balance of combat power and the struggle for resource nodes. The 5 grand elders and 12 elders present will each lead a team of 300. Your goal is to secure a basic resource node. If your combat power is lacking, you can merge with another team to secure a resource node. Me, Old Hong and Brilliant Blue will each lead a team of 500 in the 10 swords. We'll do our best to secure an intermediate node each, or a basic node at the very minimum. The 3 Vice Guild leaders will lead the remaining members together with Zero Wing to secure an advanced node or an intermediate node at minimum. 7 Wonders' distribution was considerably conservative, ensuring the least number of problems for the guild. Firstly, it ensured that the guild had enough teams to provide sufficient coverage across the 18 islands. Secondly, every team would more or less have the strength for self-conservation, even if it came across a hostile 1,000-man team. Of course, the chances of actually coming across a 1,000-man team were relatively low. Since each guild only had so many players participating in the competition, using these limited players to form 1,000-man teams was a huge extravagance. To spread their influence as wide as possible, the various participating guilds would naturally form as many teams as possible without compromising their overall combat power. What do you think? 7 Wonders asked as he looked at the guild upper echelon present. In response, the guild elders exchanged looks with each other. However, none of them voiced any objections. 7 Wonders nodded. In that case. Just as he was about to finalize his decision, however, a low voice entered everyone's ears. I object. Immediately, Frost Heaven's upper echelon turned to look at this voice's origin. The owner of this voice was none other than Shifeng, who had just arrived. However, instead of getting upset at Shifeng's interjection, 7 Wonders instead asked sincerely, Guild Leader Black Flame, do you have any better suggestions? Following 7 Wonders' question, the Grand Elders and Elders present also turned to Shifeng. Their actions showed that they were of the same mind as 7 Wonders, and they all looked forward to hearing Shifeng's suggestion. What happened to these people while I was gone? Shifeng was a little surprised at 7 Wonders and the others' response. Before he left, these people couldn't even be bothered to look at him. Now, not only did 7 Wonders' attitude change for the better, but even Frost Heaven's Grand Elders and Elders had become more amiable. What Shifeng didn't know was that news of his frightening battle had already spread. With such terrifying combat power, let alone Frost Heaven, even super guilds would treat him respectfully. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, Shifeng didn't dwell on the matter. I can't say it is a good suggestion. Calmly, Shifeng added, I just think that we should change the grouping slightly. How do we change it? 7 Wonders asked curiously. Shifeng then stretched out an open palm. My suggestion is for Zero Wing to lead 5 separate 100-man teams, while your Vice Guild leaders lead the remaining 500 players. This way we can maximize our combat effectiveness. Chapter 27:17, Gambit? 5 separate teams? Frost Heaven's elders gasped involuntarily when they heard Shifeng's suggestion. They were at a disadvantage in numbers, and even the slightest mistake could put paid to securing the 6th reserve seat. Meanwhile, although 7 Wonders' distribution was conservative, it would allow Frost Heaven to avoid significant problems. However, Shifeng was now suggesting that they split their numbers into 5 additional teams, teams that met the bare minimum requirement of 100 players. This surpassed aggressive action and bordered on madness. Guild leader Black Flame, isn't this a little too aggressive a maneuver? Wuxia couldn't help but worry. At this point, everyone already knew that Shifeng possessed frightening strength. Even if he led the smallest sized team, he should still be able to handle most of the problems he encountered. However, the 4 other teams wouldn't have such an assurance. After all, no one else possessed the frightening combat power of Shifeng. Among Zero Wing's team, the second strongest person was Violet Cloud. And her control over mana was far from comparable to Shifeng's. This was something Wuxia had verified through Violet Cloud's duel with Tianqing. As for Zero Wing's other members, their average combat standards didn't even reach the Void Realm. While they could still become useful combat power, they couldn't change the tide of battle by themselves. In fact, even Domain Realm experts couldn't do so. This was also why 7 Wonders had decided to have Frost Heaven's Grand Elders and Elders lead 300-man teams at a minimum. At this moment, Wuxia wasn't the only person puzzled by Shifeng's suggestion. Even Yulan and Yan Tianqing couldn't help staring at Shifeng in confusion. Zero Wing had indeed made great progress recently. The guild's top combatants had even experienced continuous improvements. However, they had yet to reach the standard of peerless experts. Aside from Shifeng, the only other person who could safely lead a team of 100 players in this situation was Violet Cloud. If they split their forces across 5 teams of 100, a single mistake could lead to a team wipe. After all, this competition wasn't some children's game, nor was it a struggle for just a small part of God's domain. It was a competition for the 12 great guilds' reserve seats. None of the various superpowers would hold back this time. In fact, in this competition, even Void Realm experts would only be foot soldiers. Every participating team would most likely have several or even more than a dozen of such experts assigned to them. And while Domain Realm experts could be considered high-end combatants, even they would have to flee if they went up against 100-man teams without sufficient support. In this competition, only peerless experts could possibly single-handedly turn the tide of a battle. Not to mention, 100-man teams were only the bare minimum in this competition. If Apex experts came across a 500-man team by themselves, even they would most likely suffer. And if they came across 1,000-man teams, only death awaited them. It is indeed a little aggressive. However, this is also our only chance to secure a seat. Shifeng did not refute Wuxia's words. After all, what she said was true. Otherwise, Frost Heaven won't have a single chance at victory. I'm sure you understand this as well. In the past, due to an inadequate foundation, Frost Heaven failed to secure a reserve seat during the first competition. Meanwhile, the start of the island battle was incredibly important. If they couldn't spread their forces across as many islands as possible, they would basically have to write off the competition. There were only 6 reserve seats up for grabs. Ignoring island sizes, they needed to occupy at least 3 islands worth of resource nodes to have a considerable chance of winning. However, fully occupying 3 islands was easier said than done. When Shifeng finished speaking, Frost Heaven's upper echelon fell silent. After some time had passed, Hong Xinyuan suddenly stepped forward and said, "I also agree with guild leader Black Flame's point of view. We are basically gambling on luck if we only have 21 teams. We might as well put up a fight in that case. However, if luck doesn't favor us and one of our 100-man teams gets isolated, the team won't be able to do much either," Brilliant Blue said, shaking his head. A total of 30 guilds were participating in the competition. On average, there would be at least 2 guilds on every island. If one of their 100-man teams had bad luck and got isolated on an island, the team definitely wouldn't have a good outcome. At Brilliant Blue's words, Frost Heaven's members fell silent once more. After giving the matter some thought, 7 Wonders looked at Shifeng and said, "How about this? I'll agree to form 5 more 100-man teams. However, we will support these 5 teams with only ordinary Tier 3 experts. I'm afraid we cannot afford to assign any peak experts to you." Guild leader? Hong Xinyuan couldn't help but frown at 7 Wonders' words. Although 7 Wonders had agreed to form 5 additional teams, if no peak experts supported these teams, Zero Wing's members would basically be walking a tightrope. It wouldn't even be far-fetched to say that 7 Wonders was treating these 5 teams as sacrificial pieces. Of course, Hong Xinyuan could understand 7 Wonders' decision. These 5 teams were a last-ditch effort. They naturally couldn't invest too much combat power in these teams. However, in his opinion, since they were gambling anyway, they might as well add chips to the bet. "Old Hong, don't try to persuade me. I've made my decision," 7 Wonders said firmly. I understand. Hong Xinyuan had no choice but to hold his tongue at these words. As Frost Heaven's guild leader, Seven Wonders was the guild's authority. Since Seven Wonders had already decided, Hong Xinyuan would have no way of changing the decision. Guild leader, Zero Wings members aren't familiar with Frost Heaven's members. How about I join them? This way guild leader Black Flame can command the teams better, Mushin suggested to Seven Wonders. Okay. You'll be the liaison with Zero Wing. Seven Wonders nodded in agreement. Just like Mushin had said, Shifeng knew nothing about Frost Heaven's members. Without proper understanding he wouldn't be able to make the best decisions. Meanwhile, as one of Frost Heaven's vice guild leaders, Mushin's understanding of the guild's members was excellent. She was indeed the best candidate for the liaison. Big sis, are you crazy? Kurue, who stood beside Mushin, stared at her incredulously. You dare participate in such a gambit? Dying in this competition meant losing 2 levels. For players of their level, losing 2 levels was no laughing matter. After all, they were only one small step away from the crucial level 120 threshold. If they died in this competition, it would severely delay challenging their Tier 4 promotion. Don't worry, my dear little sister. I will follow guild leader Black Flame's team. I believe there shouldn't be any problems in that case, Mushin said, chuckling. Beat 2/Beat B11/Beat Kurue was momentarily rendered speechless by Mushin's words. Afterward, Frost Heaven's members split up into different teams according to Seven Wonders' arrangement. Simultaneously, 483 Frost Heaven members were assigned to Shifeng. As for how Shifeng would distribute these players, Seven Wonders stayed out of it. Guild leader Black Flame, everyone has arrived, Mushin stated after counting the Frost Heaven members on their side. She then asked curiously, how do you plan on distributing them? I've thought about it already. Chuckling, Shifeng said, I'll lead a team by myself. Afterward, Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, Violet Cloud, and Fire Dance will each lead a team. The rest of Zero Wings members will follow Violet Cloud's and Fire Dance's teams. Isn't this? Mushin was momentarily dumbfounded. She had anticipated Violet Cloud leading a team by herself, while the rest of Zero Wings members would be split across the 3 remaining teams. After all, Violet Cloud also possessed a mana domain of her own. Yet, Shifeng was having Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose lead teams by themselves instead? At this moment, let alone Mushin, even Yulan, Yantianxing, Luofei, Alluring Summer, Zhao Yueru, Kola, Shadow Sword, Silent Blade, Turtledove, Yi Wumian, Flying Shadow and Rampant Blade were stunned. Of the Zero Wing members present, the ones who needed support the most were the 2 vice guild leaders. After all, the 2 of them hadn't improved their levels and equipment in the slightest over the past few weeks. Although Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's weapons and equipment were still far superior to those of the various superpowers peak experts, the 2 of them were still slightly inferior to Violet Cloud and Fire Dance in combat standard. Not giving them any support was akin to going all in on a gamble. Ignoring everyone's doubts, Shifeng turned to the 2 people in question and asked, Snow, Aqua, are you fine with this arrangement? No problem. The 2 responded indifferently as if this matter had nothing to do with them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You good? That settles it then. Shifeng did not make any additional explanations. Following this, the various superpowers waited for another hour or so until a loud bell tolled in the War God's Temple, the sound echoing throughout Flame Dragon City. The competition for the 12 Great Guild's reserve seats officially began. Immediately, the participants thronging the War God's Temple's plaza turned into streaks of light and vanished one after another. Chapter 27:18, Team Distribution. It's starting. It's finally starting. Crap. So this is the spectator stand? Awesome. When the spectating players arrived in their seats, they couldn't help marveling at their surroundings. At this time, everyone was in the sky. More precisely, the spectators were seated in a coliseum-like structure that hovered above the 18 islands serving as the competition venue. The 18 islands were like chess boards, with the participants being the chess pieces. Not only could the spectators freely choose which island to spectate, but they could also zoom in to observe specific battles. The only unfortunate part was that the zoom distance was limited. The closest those in the normal seats could get was 30 meters above the islands, too far for detailed observations. Spectators in the VIP viewing rooms, however, could not only spectate the battles as if they were there in person but also have the VIP rooms notify them of any ongoing battles. This function allowed the room occupants to avoid missing out on any exciting battles. As the spectators above the competition venue were screaming and exclaiming, the players randomly teleported onto the 18 islands were already taking action. Whether our guild can reach the top to become a giant in God's domain will depend on this battle. The guild will put anyone who performs well in this competition under priority training. Everyone listen up. Our 1,000-man team has only 2 goals. The first is to occupy an intermediate resource node or better as soon as possible. The second is to secure the node firmly. We are fortunate. Our guild has 5 300-man teams on this island. The higher-ups have already stated that we must rank within the top 5 on this island. So long as we achieve this goal, everyone will receive 2,000 GCPs after the competition. The various participating guilds frantically went on the offensive, the tense atmosphere building excitement among the spectators in the sky. Meanwhile, inside a VIP viewing room, as expected of the 5 great super guilds, the depth of their foundations far surpasses the other guilds. Mu Lingsha sighed ruefully as she looked at the statistics of the 18 islands. The 5 great super guilds had between 53 to 61 teams each, and every one of them had at least 6 100-man teams. All of these small teams were led by legends in the virtual gaming industry. Each of the 5 great super guilds had teams on 11 to 13 of the 18 islands. In comparison, the other guilds had teams on only 5 or 6 islands on average, half of what the 5 great super guilds had. Right off the bat, it was already clear that the other guilds stood no chance against the 5 great super guilds. Of course, there were also some lucky guilds that had teams on 8 or 9 islands. However, this couldn't be considered a fortunate matter either, as their numbers were spread so thinly that they could hardly preserve themselves, let alone occupy resource nodes. On the other hand, the 5 great super guilds' personnel were divided relatively evenly. Each of them only had 1 or 2 islands with insufficient personnel, which wouldn't affect the overall situation, as more than half of the islands they occupied had a considerable number of personnel. They wouldn't have any problems ranking within the top 5 in guild points. To put it simply, it was certain that the 5 great super guilds would secure a reserve seat for themselves. In terms of personnel distribution, Miracle and Sacred Temple have the best chance to secure the 6th seat. Both guilds have teams on 9 islands, and their personnel distribution is fairly even as well. The other guilds are evidently far behind these 2 guilds, Unyielding Heart analyzed. No. When Mu Lingsha took a look at Frost Heaven's statistics, she was slightly surprised. Frost Heaven isn't doing too badly either. It has teams on 7 islands. If comparing based on the number of islands occupied, Frost Heaven could rank 12th out of the 30 participating superpowers. It was only 2 islands behind Miracle and Sacred Temple. No. Of the 7 islands Frost Heaven has been allocated to, 2 islands don't even have 500 players on it. Moreover, Unyielding Soul couldn't help shaking his head and sighing after carefully reading Frost Heaven's data. While Mu Lingsha and Unyielding Heart were discussing Frost Heaven, many other powers in the VIP viewing rooms were doing the same. Some of these powers gloated over Frost Heaven's misfortune, while some sympathized with the guild. As to why everyone reacted in such a way, it was because Black Flame, who was considered Frost Heaven's saving grace, had actually been assigned to island number 3, a large island. And worse, Black Flame's team was merely a 100-man team. He would be up against the teams of 16 superpowers on island number 3. Even the 5 great super guilds were present in full. The competition here was simply nightmarish in difficulty. It would be a fool's dream to try and secure a resource node with only a 100-man team. In addition, Frost Heaven only had 2 teams on island number 7, a medium island. One of them was a 100-man team led by Aqua Rose, while the other was a 300-man team led by one of Frost Heaven's elders. The 2 teams combined didn't even have 500 players. In comparison, the 8 other guilds on the island had between 1,000 to 2,000 players each. To make matters worse, the teams led by Frost Heaven's 7 Wonders, Hong Xinyuan, and 5 elders actually got assigned to island number 17. In total, the guild had 2,500 players assigned to a measly small island. Guild leader Black Flame, what should we do? Mushin inevitably grew anxious after learning of the various island situations. The guild leader's side won't have any problems, but we only have our team and Gentle Snow's 100-man team here. This was undoubtedly the worst possible scenario for Frost Heaven. Initially, they had been hoping for Sure Feng to be sent to a small island. And so long as the number of guild members on that island reached 1,000, occupying 2 resource nodes on that island shouldn't be a problem. 2 resource nodes worth of guild points would be more than enough to propel Frostheaven to the top 5 rankings of that island. After all, a small island only had 12 resource nodes. With so many guilds competing for the nodes, there wouldn't be enough for each competing guild to secure one. Now, however, Shifeng had ended up on a large island with only 200 friendly players. In this situation, the most he could do was occupy 1 resource node, which would basically be useless. Moreover, as Shifeng was foreign aid, he would get only half the points official participants would get. On the other hand, 7 Wonders' side should have no problem occupying 2 resource nodes. In fact, they had too many people for the task. However, securing a 3rd node on the small island would be difficult since a small island had only 12 resource nodes. If Frostheaven occupied too many, the other superpowers would join hands to target Frostheaven. This is still a relatively good start, Shifeng said calmly as he inspected the distribution information. Let's meet up with Snow's team for now. A good start? Mushin fell speechless momentarily. In the current situation, the chances of Frostheaven securing the 6th reserve seat were incredibly slim. However, what Mushin didn't know was that Shifeng had hoped to be assigned to a medium or large island. After all, only medium and large islands had advanced resource nodes. As foreign aid, he would receive only half the points of official participants. Hence, securing an advanced node was a must if he wished to have an impact. His random assignment to a large island couldn't be considered bad luck. If he had gotten assigned to a small island, now that would be truly bad luck. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. During the time Shifeng's team was converging with Gentle Snow's team, a 1,000-man team was slowly traversing a dense forest on island number 3. Meanwhile, the cool-headed youth leading the team was currently staring at a 100-man team several hundred yards away, with scorching flames blazing in his eyes. Black Flame, it seems your luck has finally run out. If you have to blame someone, blame yourself for arranging your teams in such a way. Now, I will let you know the consequences of going against me. Excitement filled 1,000 Miles' eyes as he looked at Gentle Snow and her team in the distance. Vice Guild Leader Miles, we have already scouted the vicinity. There are no other guilds nearby, a level 118 Tier 3 Ranger reported through the team chat. Good. 1,000 Miles grew even more excited at this piece of news. He then announced through the team chat, since no other guilds are nearby, we don't need to be polite. Everyone charge. Let's kill this Vice Guild Leader of Zero Wing first and collect some interest. Yes, sir. At 1,000 Miles' command, Miracle's members, lurking excitedly in the forest, prepared to ambush Gentle Snow's team. They would make sure that her team had nowhere to be run. /beam. Chapter 27:19 Gentle Snows soared above the competition venue, inside a VIP room. This is bad. Miracle's 1,000 Miles discovered Gentle Snow's team. Flourishing Willow said nervously as she stared at a dense forest on island number 3. Gentle Snow will be in trouble. 1,000 Miles' team is a 1,000-man team. The experts on 1,000 Miles' team are astonishing. I'm afraid there are at least a dozen peak experts and 2 apex experts. Galaxy Past, the Star Alliance's guild leader, also frowned when he saw the situation. As a guild of Star Moon Kingdom, the Star Alliance had frequently clashed with Gentle Snow's Ouroboros during the early stages of the game. In fact, Galaxy Past had even treated Gentle Snow as his rival. Hence, Galaxy Past paid close attention to Zero Wing in this competition. This was especially so for his ex-rival, Gentle Snow. Galaxy Past had even set Gentle Snow as a priority target on the spectator's interface. So long as she fought in a battle, he would be notified of it immediately. The gap between the two sides is too large. Purple Eye, who was now a level 117 Tier 3 Great Mage, shook her head and sighed. If Gentle Snow were leading Zero Wing's main force, she might still stand a chance. However, with her strength alone, there's no way her team can win. Even escaping will be a problem. Although the Star Alliance had been in conflict with Ouroboros and even the current Zero Wing, as guilds originating from Star Moon Kingdom and peak experts from the same kingdom, Purple Eye still hoped to see Gentle Snow and Zero Wing perform well in this competition. Damn it. If only we could join the battle. The other Star Alliance upper echelon present also sighed and grumbled. They never thought that Gentle Snow's team would be so unlucky as to encounter a 1,000-man team right off the bat. Miracle has started moving. Gentle Snow. Why haven't you noticed them yet? Flourishing Willow reflexively stood up in worry and pointed at Miracle's members on the holographic projection. A 100 versus 1000 battle already placed Gentle Snow's team in an overwhelming disadvantage. Moreover, Miracle's team was even stuffed with experts, while Frost Heaven's members were obviously no good. Even the strongest among them had reached only the refinement realm. Most of them weren't even at the half-step refinement realm standard. Let alone Miracle's experts, even the Star Alliance's main force could trounce these Tier 3 experts from Frost Heaven. However, despite the Star Alliance's members' thoughts and shouts, Miracle's experts had already sneaked within 100 yards of Gentle Snow's team. 4 Tier 3 players, such a distance required only a few steps to cross. Gentle Snow's team had no chance to flee now. Good. Magic team start chanting. 1,000 Miles commanded after his team arrived within the critical range. He then turned to the 2 elderly men beside him and said, "Elder Rock, Elder Feather, I'll leave Gentle Snow to you too. Do not let her get away. Rest assured, Vice Guild Leader. Leave that young lady to these 2 old men." Elder Rock, a white-bearded old man clad in black robes and armed with 2 pitch-black short swords, answered. "If we take action, she won't have a chance to escape." Elder Feather, an old man with golden pupils, said, smiling. He wore dark gray leather armor and carried a white-winged feather bow. "I am naturally confident in your abilities. Both of you are our guild's top-ranking ambushers. However, Gentle Snow isn't an easy target either. In terms of combat power, she rivals domain realm experts already. Killing her will definitely deal a huge blow to Zero Wing," 1,000 Miles said, smiling. 1,000 Miles felt reassured that Elder Rock and Elder Feather were taking action. After all, the 2 elders could hold their ground even against a peerless expert if they worked together. This was why the guild had let these 2 elders join a 1,000-man team. However, he did not wish to repeat his mistakes. He would use everything he had even to deal with a minor problem. When 1,000 Miles finished speaking, the magical class players in the team had also completed the incantations for their spells. "Vice Guild Leader, all preparations are done. We can make them disappear from the island at your command," a level 118 Tier 3 Great Mage reported quietly. "Good." 1,000 Miles did not doubt his subordinate's words at all, since the 20 magical class players had jointly cast 8 destruction spells. These powerful spells would devastate even level 120 mythic monsters, let alone Tier 3 players. The magical class players on the team grew excited. After all, they rarely had an opportunity to use such high-caliber spells. The bosses in dungeons normally wouldn't give them a chance to cast such spells. Only during siege battles would they have such an opportunity. Now that they could use Gentle Snow's team for target practice, they were naturally more than happy to do so. Immediately, 1,000 Miles turned to look at Gentle Snow's team. However, the instant 1,000 Miles turned around, his entire body shuddered. Before anyone noticed, Gentle Snow had already appeared before his team's magical class players. The Tier 3 Great Mage that reported to him was even laughing, wholly unaware of Gentle Snow's arrival. "Not good. We got discovered," 1,000 Miles shouted instinctively. At this moment, 1,000 Miles wasn't the only person to have noticed Gentle Snow's sudden appearance. The other Miracle members noticed her too. Only their minds failed to react to the situation. Gentle Snow, who had used Instant Flash to arrive before her ambushers, had no intention of giving her opponents time to react. She immediately swung the glorious Will replica, which had already been upgraded to the fragmented legendary rank, at the Tier 3 Great Mage leading Miracle's magical class players. Gentle Snow's slash was straightforward, so fast that the Great Mage could only watch as her sword descended. He didn't even have time to dodge using instantaneous movement. The next moment, the Great Mage was cleaved in half, and his HP plummeted straight to 0. What a quick slash. 1,000 Miles couldn't help gasping when he saw his subordinate getting killed. The Great Mage in question was a Void Realm expert. Normally, so long as his opponent made any movements, he would instantly sense his opponent's intentions and react appropriately. Moreover, all magical class players possess skills or spells like instantaneous movement. Hence, in order to finish the Great Mage in one hit, even domain realm experts had to launch an attack without the Great Mage's awareness of the situation. However, despite Gentle Snow executing an attack right before the Great Mage's eyes, the latter had actually failed to respond to it. "Little girl, you are really courageous. Aren't you afraid of making a one-way trip?" Elder Feather sneered as he looked at Gentle Snow. However, despite his confident words, he still observed Gentle Snow cautiously. He then privately whispered to Elder Rock, It seems this little girl is much stronger than we imagined, Old Rock. I'll try to create an opportunity for you in a moment. Leave it to me. The black-clad Elder Rock also understood that the woman before them shouldn't be underestimated. Immediately, the short swords he held behind his back bloomed with a pitch-black brilliance. As soon as there was an opening, he would use his strongest move to finish off Gentle Snow. However, before Elder Feather and Elder Rock could make their move, Gentle Snow seemed to see through their intentions already. Before the two elderly men realized it, 16 swords of light were flying at them, the abrupt attack catching them off guard. To make matters worse, they actually couldn't perceive the presence of these 16 light swords. Damn it. Immediately, both Elder Feather and Elder Rock used their life-saving skills simultaneously. The next moment, a storm brewed around Elder Feather, who was a Tier 3 ranger, the storm deflecting all attacks around him. As for Elder Rock, who was a Tier 3 assassin, he executed bewildering footwork and instantly split into 6 identical copies of himself. It was impossible to tell the real one from the fakes. After Elder Feather and Elder Rock, 1,000 Miles was the quickest to react among the miracle members present. He raised his divine skeleton shield and dark red battle axe and charged at Gentle Snow, leaving behind an afterimage. Tier 3 skill Triple Purgatory Flash. The next moment, 1,000 Miles brandished his axe and summoned 3 black crescents that attacked Gentle Snow from 3 different directions. The attack was so fast that even Domain Realm experts had to focus all their attention on it if they wished to dodge or block it. However, 1,000 Miles did not see Gentle Snow paying any attention to him. As if he were only an ant by the roadside, she completely ignored his existence. Die. Feeling extremely humiliated by Gentle Snow's attitude, 1,000 Miles bellowed in anger. Simultaneously, the 3 black crescents' power also strengthened slightly, enough to shatter space itself. However, 1,000 Miles quickly felt despair overwhelm him. Even now, Gentle Snow still ignored him. She merely swung her great sword at the crescent approaching her from the front. Immediately afterward, the black crescent deflected along the greatsword's trajectory and smashed into the 2 other black crescents. To 1,000 Miles' surprise, after the latter 2 crescents got struck, their courses actually deviated toward himself. How is this possible? 1,000 Miles was dumbfounded. Although he wanted to repulse these 2 black crescents, his body simply couldn't react in time. Boom. Boom. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU2 dull sounds appeared, and 1,000 Miles stumbled 2 consecutive steps backward. Each step was accompanied by a significant loss of HP. By the end of the attack, 2 deep cuts had appeared on his armor, and his HP had fallen below 50%. Just when 1,000 Miles thought he could catch a breather, he noticed that his surroundings were surprisingly quiet. You guys, what happened? 1,000 Miles couldn't help his confusion when he saw his teammates' shocked expressions. However, before 1,000 Miles could take in the situation, another black crescent flew across his neck and left behind a black line in space and a flying head. Chapter 27:20 Beyond the Domain Realm. When 1,000 Miles' body collapsed to the ground, the miracle members in the dense forest shuddered involuntarily. The Star Alliance's members spectating in their VIP viewing room also gaped in shock. How did she become so strong? Purple Eye exclaimed in disbelief. Not only did Gentle Snow slay a Tier 3 peak expert after going deep into Miracle's ranks, but she had also taken the initiative to attack 2 Domain Realm experts. While doing so, she had even casually killed the Purgatory Knight 1,000 Miles. The last part, where Gentle Snow faced 1,000 Miles, was especially amazing. 1,000 Miles should have generated those 3 black crescents using a skill, yet Gentle Snow had made it look as if she was the one who summoned them. It was simply unbelievable. Has the gap between us gotten so big already? Galaxy Past was at a loss for words as he stared at Gentle Snow's figure in the holographic projection. They were both Starmoon Kingdom's top-ranking experts, yet it was now obvious that the actual gap between them was massive. They were already in completely different worlds. Guild Leader, I plan to leave Starmoon Kingdom temporarily after this competition. I want to explore other places, Flourishing Willow said. She was similarly shocked by Gentle Snow's strength and felt unreconciled. The gap between them clearly hadn't been so massive before. Both of them were experts ranked in the God's Domain experts list. Now, however, Flourishing Willow doubted she could survive even one move against Gentle Snow. How could she possibly accept this situation? Sure. Galaxy Past did not question Flourishing Willow's decision. On the contrary, he turned to Purple Eye and asked, "How about you take a look outside too?" The guild doesn't have many matters to deal with now, and I can handle them by myself. Thank you, guild leader. Purple Eye nodded while gritting her teeth. I won't disappoint you. Although the Star Alliance normally mingled in Starmoon Kingdom's neighboring countries as well, compared to Zero Wing, whose members fought all over God's domain, the Star Alliance's chessboard was truly insignificant and laughable. During the time the Star Alliance's members were in shock, the members of Miracle inside the dense forest were likewise stunned. As if they had just encountered a ferocious monster, every one of them stood stock still. One move. Gentle Snow had killed 1,000 miles in just one move. With such strength, she already rivaled peerless experts. Elder Rock and Elder Feather, who had successfully evaded Gentle Snow's attack, were dazed, fear and confusion coloring their faces. Impossible. How can a little girl like you reach such a realm? Elder Rock couldn't help doubting his eyes as he gazed at Gentle Snow. I never thought anyone could reach that realm at such a young age. Am I really getting too old? Elder Feather also turned somewhat silly as he looked at Gentle Snow. They hadn't thought much of it when they saw Gentle Snow kill the Void Realm Great Mage. However, after seeing Gentle Snow kill 1,000 miles, they finally understood what happened. The woman before them wasn't some powerful expert rivaling domain realm experts. Instead, she was an existence that had transcended the domain realm. When the two elderly men looked at the young lady before them, they suddenly felt they had lived their lives in vain. After all, they had racked their brains just to reach the domain realm's upper stage, yet Gentle Snow was already beyond the domain realm. How could they not despair at this discovery? Even in veteran super guilds, anyone capable of reaching the domain realm's upper stage was generally over 60 years old already. As for the existences that had transcended the domain realm and reached the higher domain realm, they were true old monsters. These existences were the mainstays of the 5 great super guilds. However, during the time Elder Rock and Elder Feather were in a daze, Miracle's other Tier 3 experts regained their senses and suddenly charged at Gentle Snow. Kill. This woman killed Vice Guild Leader Miles. We must not let her leave alive. That's right. In this special space, even peerless experts can't afford to duke it out with us. The next moment, over 100 Guardian Knights and Shield Warriors activated their defensive skills and closed in on Gentle Snow. Simultaneously, the magical class players on the team started casting combination spells one after another. Old Rock, let's leave. It'll be too late otherwise. Elder Feather suggested as he glanced at Elder Rock. He then activated a skill without hesitation and transformed into a gale. He crossed several dozen yards with every step he took, showing no intention of fighting whatsoever. Snapping out of his daze, Elder Rock hurriedly used wind steps, which he had upgraded to Tier 3 and entered stealth. Elders? Miracle's members were stunned momentarily. What was up with this situation? Despite being the two strongest combatants in their 1,000-man team, Elder Rock and Elder Feather had actually fled. At this moment, let alone Miracle's members, even the Star Alliance's spectating members couldn't help gaping in shock. What's going on? Why are those two Apex experts running away? Despite having entered the flowing water realm already, Galaxy Past, Flourishing Willow and Purple Eye were bewildered by Elder Rock and Elder Feather's decision to flee. Domain realm experts were existences that even the various superpowers wouldn't want to offend casually. Not to mention both Elder Rock and Elder Feather had clearly made significant progress in the domain realm already. The two of them working together could most likely go up against peerless experts. Not to mention they still had the 1,000-man team supporting them. Even a peerless expert wouldn't want to clash head-on with such a force. Yet, the two Apex experts had actually fled? While everyone was bewildered by this situation, Gentle Snow executed a vertical leap, vanishing from sight. When she reappeared, she was standing 50 yards away from her original position. The glorious will in her hands bloomed with dazzling brilliance. Will of Light. Instantly, 12 brilliant flashes streaked through the dense vegetation, brightly illuminating the entire forest. What is she doing? Frost Heaven's members, who were spectating the fight from a distance, were confused. Likewise, Miracle's members also found this situation odd. They couldn't help wondering why Gentle Snow would launch an attack at empty air. Who could she possibly hit? However, this thought lasted for only half a second in everyone's mind. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. U-boom. A deafening boom spread through the area. Immediately afterward, web-like cracks formed within the dense forest space and spread up to 300 yards away from the explosion's epicenter. Then the entire region collapsed. The cracked space transformed into a pitch-black area with space and time in disarray. A boundless spatial storm subsequently raged through the area, devouring all of Miracle's members. Even Elder Rock and Elder Feather, who had escaped beforehand, got swept up in this chaotic storm, their HPs draining like running water. Several seconds later, the shattered space started returning to normal. However, at this point, Miracle's 1,000-man team was nowhere in sight. And from above the island, it looked as if a huge meteorite had struck the dense forest, leaving behind only a huge impact crater. What exactly did she do? Chapter 27-21, Uproar. Guild Leader, did you see that? Purple Eye goggled in shock as she pointed at the huge crater in the holographic projection. Gentle Snow, how did she do that? Gentle Snow should have destroyed the space in the surrounding area to annihilate Miracle's 1,000-man team, Galaxy Past answered calmly. No. I know that, but I'm not referring to that, Purple Eye said, shaking her head. She then turned to Galaxy Past and continued, I'm talking about Gentle Snow's 12 consecutive slashes. She actually stacked the power of those 12 slashes. It was challenging to combine the power of multiple sources. The more sources one tried to combine, the greater the difficulty. In fact, the difficulty increased exponentially. Even Apex experts who had reached the domain realm could, at best, combine the power of 6 attacks. Yet, now, Gentle Snow had actually combined 12 attacks into one. Moreover, she had accomplished this feat while wielding a great sword. This was no longer a matter of strength. Such a feat should be impossible for humans. Gentle Snow was a genius of their generation. They had also entered God's domain at the same time. Even if Gentle Snow had made rapid progress, reaching such a level should be possible for her. At this point, she couldn't even be considered human anymore. She was a monster in human skin. Purple, calm down, Galaxy Past advised. You should be aware of Zero Wing's strength. Zero Wing has always been able to accomplish feats other guilds can't. Gentle Snow might have learned a powerful skill that allowed her to perform such an action. Galaxy Past could sympathize with Purple Eye's unreconciled and helpless feelings. After all, this kind of power already exceeded the realm of humans. It was no exaggeration to say that Gentle Snow had become an existence that they would never surpass in their lifetimes. Meanwhile, inside a lounge in Miracle's headquarters in the real world, the lids of 2 virtual gaming cabins opened slowly. We still died. We didn't even have a chance to escape. With this, we'll have to wait even longer before we can start our Tier 4 promotions, Elder Rock grumbled as he sat up in his gaming cabin, a bitter smile forming on his face. We are lucky. If this were the preliminaries, we would have lost 5 levels. Elder Feather frowned as he sat up in his cabin. A hint of awe appearing in his eyes, he continued, Truly, that kind of monster isn't something we can go up against. She actually destroyed the entire space to prevent us from escaping. Even short-duration invulnerability skills are useless against that kind of attack. 1,000 Miles truly screwed us over. His information is absurdly inaccurate, Elder Rock snarled. In hindsight, that little girl is the real monster, not Black Flame. However, it's fortunate we came across her so soon. There is still time to salvage this situation, Elder Feather said, smiling. What do you mean, Old Feather? Elder Rock asked, puzzled. I relayed this information to the guild leader before we got killed. I'm sure the others know about this by now, Elder Feather said. Now that it is revealed that Frostheaven has a higher domain realm expert in addition to Black Flame, I'm sure you should know what this means. Are you saying the guild leader will relay this information to the other superpowers? Elder Rock couldn't help growing a little excited. That was a higher domain realm expert they were talking about. On Island number 3, there was no way Black Flame could cause an upset by himself. However, it would be a different story if a higher domain realm expert were added to the equation. Zero Wing might actually be able to secure 2 resource nodes and become the 6th-ranked guild on Island number 3. In that case, Frostheaven's chances of winning the 6th reserve seat would increase significantly. However, once Miracle spread this information, the various superpowers would most likely band together to prevent Frostheaven from ousting them. Just as Elder Feather assumed, Miracle did not conceal Gentle Snow's information. On the contrary, the guild publicized it throughout the arena. Every participating guild became aware of Gentle Snow's existence. Higher domain realm? Zero Wing actually had such an expert? Could Miracle be lying to us? That's the higher domain realm we are talking about. How can a little girl like Gentle Snow reach it? That shouldn't be the case. According to our members on Island Number 3, Gentle Snow did indeed clash with one of Miracle's 1,000-man teams. Moreover, their fight created quite a commotion. It could be heard even from miles away. After our members inspected the battlefield through magical observation, they found that Miracle's 1,000-man team had indeed been annihilated. Moreover, Gentle Snow had even wiped out Miracle's team with just one move. For a time, the various participating guilds had heated discussions over this matter. Although most of them remained dubious of the claim that Gentle Snow had reached the higher domain realm, they were still afraid of her. The higher domain realm was a secret among the various superpowers. Ordinary players weren't even aware of its existence. Currently, those who had reached the higher domain realm were old monsters belonging to the 5 great super guilds, and these old monsters almost never revealed themselves to the public. In fact, the public had mostly forgotten about them. However, the various superpowers understood that the reason the 5 great super guilds could be referred to as such was precisely because of these existences. So long as this group of old monsters took action, even peerless experts wouldn't be able to stop them. After all, peerless experts were merely a bunch of people still stuck in the domain realm. Even the stronger ones had reached only the domain realm's upper stage. A more significant part of the reason peerless experts were called as such was their basic attributes, which far surpassed those of other domain realm experts. However, it was a different story for higher domain realm experts. These existences possessed inhuman combat standards. Moreover, there was almost no trial in God's domain that could trouble them. They could easily overcome the hurdles they faced and secure as many opportunities as they wanted in God's domain. One could say that in terms of both basic attributes and combat standards, higher domain realm experts far surpassed peerless experts. Even one such existence could turn the tide of a war. Now that Gentle Snow was suspected of having reached the higher domain realm as well, the various superpowers would have no choice but to take precautions against her. Meanwhile, when Frost Heaven's members heard this piece of news, every one of them was shocked. How is this possible? That Vice Guild leader from Zero Wing is actually in the higher domain realm. Brilliant Blue felt like he was dreaming when he read his subordinate's report. He simply couldn't bring himself to believe it. This was the higher domain realm they were talking about. However, at this time, the various participating superpowers were all talking about this matter. Moreover, the Frost Heaven members with Gentle Snow acknowledged that she had single-handedly wiped out Miracle's 1,000-man team. Miracle even publicly admitted that Gentle Snow had killed Rock and Feather, 2 of Miracle's elders, in a single move. After taking all these factors into account, this matter was almost certain to be true. The heavens haven't forsaken Frost Heaven. 7 Wonders grew ecstatic upon hearing this news. He then looked at Hong Xinyun, who had reported the matter to him, and said, "Old Hong, you've really found a huge treasure for our guild this time. Guild leader, you overestimate me." Hong Xinyun shook his head with a smile. In reality, even he had not been aware that Gentle Snow had reached the higher domain realm. Had he known, he wouldn't have offered just 3 upper zone reserve slots to Zero Wing. Meanwhile, when Mushin on Island Number 3 received the news about Gentle Snow, she was lost in thought for a long time. Black Flame. Is Gentle Snow really at the higher domain realm? Mushin couldn't help asking Shifeng. Probably. Shifeng chuckled. Probably? What do you mean, probably? Has she reached it or not? Mushin got irritated at Shifeng for persisting in keeping her in the dark. The various superpowers already believed that Gentle Snow was a higher domain realm expert. Yet Shifeng was still so close-mouthed about it. Shifeng couldn't help smiling bitterly at Mushin's reaction. Truthfully, he didn't actually know what realm Gentle Snow had reached. After all, he didn't know what kind of world the higher domain realm was. In addition, when he looked at Gentle Snow, he felt as if he was looking at a cloud. He couldn't see through her at all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, however, while he didn't know whether Gentle Snow was currently at the higher domain realm, he was sure of one thing: Gentle Snow was undoubtedly number 1 in the world in combat experience. However, Miracle has played a really vicious move this time. Shifeng frowned as he read Miracle's public announcement. At Shifeng's words, Mushin's face darkened. Are you saying Miracle plans to kill with a borrowed sword? That's right. Shifeng nodded. On the surface, Miracle is expressing its indignation over Gentle Snow annihilating one of its 1,000-man teams. In reality, it is announcing to the other guilds that Frost Heaven has a great chance of securing the 6th seat. This way, the other guilds will have to consider banding together to target Frost Heaven. What should we do then? Mushin understood how vicious Miracle's move was. If they didn't handle this matter properly, Frost Heaven might come under attack from all sides. Should I notify my guild leader of this? Shi Feng sneered. Since Miracle wants Frost Heaven to become a thorn in the various guilds' eyes, we'll make the various guilds understand that the 6th seat belongs to us. Chapter 27-22. No regrets. Have the various guilds acknowledge us? Mushin revealed a wry smile when she heard Shi Feng's words. But out of the 6 reserve seats available, only 1 is obtainable. How can the other guilds possibly give up on it? There are 6 reserve seats up for grabs, yet the various guilds have given up on 5 of them. Why do you think that's the case? Shi Feng responded with a question of his own. Isn't that obvious? It's because the 5 great super guilds are too strong. There's no way the other guilds can compete with them, Mushin answered, failing to understand why Shi Feng asked such a question. Who the owners of 5 of the 6 reserve seats were was common knowledge for everyone. Otherwise, the various guilds wouldn't be competing so desperately for the 6th seat, with some guilds even risking everything they had. That's right. It is because those 5 super guilds are sufficiently strong, Shi Feng said, nodding. Hence, those guilds don't dare compete with them. Do you mean to make the various guilds deem us too strong to provoke? That's impossible, Mushin said, shaking her head. She felt that Shi Feng was building castles in the air. Frost Heaven doesn't have that kind of strength right now. Indeed. Frost Heaven doesn't have the necessary strength right now, Shi Feng said unceremoniously. That's why we need to go crazy, so crazy that the other guilds become afraid of us. Only by doing so do we stand a chance of victory. They couldn't afford to act defensively. And even if they did, they wouldn't be able to protect anything in a situation where every other guild, aside from the 5 great super guilds, were Frost Heaven's enemies. Even Shi Feng couldn't turn the tide of battle. After all, this was a competition for resource nodes, not a contest of strength. Even if he occupied every resource node on an island, there were still 17 other islands. Frost Heaven would still lose. Not to mention, occupying an entire island would be a challenge even for him. The size of island number 3 was like a level 100 neutral map. If the various guilds players hid from him, he would have great difficulty locating them, regardless of his mana domain. Moreover, every participating player was a tier 3 expert. When not subjected to any debuffs, they could run very fast. In addition, he would have to occupy the many resource nodes on the island while also ensuring their safety. How do we do that? Even if we go crazy, we still need a target. Mushin understood what Shi Feng was saying. However, she found it truly hard to imagine how they could make the various guilds fear them and actively give up on competing with them. I see, of course we have one. Smiling, Shi Feng added, and it's even ready-made. Are you talking about Miracle? Shaking her head, Mushin argued, although Miracle has used a trick to deal with us, even if we annihilate Miracle, I'm afraid the other guilds still won't rest. No. Not Miracle. How can Miracle possibly be qualified for such a role? Shi Feng smiled while shaking his head. Didn't you already mention which guilds the other guilds don't dare to offend? Mushin gasped involuntarily when she heard Shi Feng's words. Are you saying, that's right? The 5 great super guilds? Shi Feng nodded. Of course we won't have to target all 5 of them. Going for mythology should be more than enough. In his previous life, Miracle had relied on mythology to secure one of the reserve seats during the first official competition. Since he was already going against Miracle in this life, it was only a matter of time before he had to deal with mythology. In that case, he might as well strike first to gain an advantage. Isn't this a little too crazy? That's one of the 5 great super guilds we are talking about. Mushin couldn't help feeling a little afraid at the mention of making an enemy out of one of the 5 great super guilds. The 5 great super guilds were like the sun in the virtual gaming industry. While most guilds might declare their intent to surpass the 5 great super guilds, it was another thing altogether to actually fight one. For the various superpowers, the stronger they grew, the more fearful of the 5 great super guilds they became. After all, the depth of the 5 great super guilds' foundations was simply unfathomable. This isn't madness. Shi Feng shook his head. In an earnest tone he said, this is Frost Heaven's only way out. Whether you secure a seat will depend on your decision. Afterward, Shi Feng stopped trying to convince Mushin and had her relay this proposal to 7 Wonders. Whether they went through with his plan or not would depend on Frost Heaven's guild leader. Declare war on mythology? Is Black Flame insane? Brilliant Blue trembled when he received Shi Feng's suggestion. Immediately he contacted Seven Wonders and protested, "Guild leader, that's one of the 5 great super guilds we are talking about. Even 3 Frost Heavens wouldn't be a match for it." "I understand." Seven Wonders also wore a gloomy face. Helplessly he said, "However, we only have 2 options if we wish to secure a reserve seat. One is to fight the numerous participating guilds, and the other is to fight mythology. There are no other options." Miracle's ploy was simply too vicious. If Frost Heaven went up against the various superpowers, it wouldn't stand a chance whatsoever. After all, in this scenario, Frost Heaven would lose the initiative to attack other guilds, constrained to defending its territories. However, how could it possibly defend against so many guilds with its limited numbers? Frost Heaven's only other option was to attack mythology. If Frost Heaven succeeded in causing mythology to suffer even a minor setback, it would still be of great help to Frost Heaven in securing the 6th reserve seat. Meanwhile, after Seven Wonders finished speaking, Brilliant Blue also sank into deep thought. "We have only one choice now." Looking at Brilliant Blue's face on his screen, Seven Wonders asked, "Do we fight or not?" "Guild leader, even if I wish to fight, how do we go about it? That's mythology we are talking about." "We stand no chance whatsoever," Brilliant Blue said with a bitter smile. The island number 11 he was assigned to had only 3 teams from Frost Heaven, his own 500-man team, a 300-man team led by an elder, and Violet Cloud's 100-man team for a total of 900 players. On the other hand, mythology had a total of 2,600 members on island number 11. Moreover, the person leading this force was the Divine Spear Demon Rex, the commander of mythology's trump card legion and a legendary figure even in mythology. "Do you think the other islands have a chance of winning?" Seven Wonders rolled his eyes at Brilliant Blue. Mythology's members were distributed very evenly. Any island it had a presence on had at least 2,000 mythology members. And of the 7 islands Frost Heaven's teams were assigned to, only island number 17 did not have mythology's presence. "However, you don't need to hurry. Group up with Zero Wings members first before taking action," Seven Wonders said. "I understand. Even if I have to put my life on the line, I will make mythology suffer." Brilliant Blue did not oppose Seven Wonders' decision. This upcoming battle would decide whether Frost Heaven would rise or fall. Afterward, Seven Wonders relayed his command to the Frost Heaven members on the other islands. In 2 hours, they would launch a simultaneous assault on mythology's resource nodes on Frost Heaven's 6 islands. As Frost Heaven's members waited quietly for their fateful moment, fierce battles occurred one after another on the various islands. The savage clash between superpowers thoroughly dumbfounded the spectating major powers. They never thought that the foundations of these superpowers would be so astonishing. If not for this competition, none of them would even suspect that the various superpowers' younger generation had already developed to such a frightening extent. Not only had many of these younger generation talents reached the Void Realm already, but some had even reached the Domain Realm. Given enough time, these Domain Realm youths would definitely become leading lights in God's domain. Shortly after the first bout of battles, the various resource nodes also fell under the ownership of players. To no one's surprise, the 5 great super guilds held an overwhelming advantage over the other participating superpowers. Close at their heels were Miracle and Sacred Temple. Both Miracle and Sacred Temple had managed to rank 6th on 5 of the islands they were assigned to. If this situation persisted, there was no doubt that the 6th reserve seat's owner would emerge from one of them. However, as everyone was guessing which of these 2 guilds would secure the 6th seat, some spectating players and participating guilds noticed a peculiarity. What's going on with Frost Heaven? They're not even trying to compete for resource nodes. I know, right? Aside from ranking 5th on island number 17, they haven't taken any action on the 6 other islands. They're not giving up, are they? Have they gotten scared? Many of the participating guilds laughed at Frost Heaven's performance. Initially, Frost Heaven should have had a high chance of winning because of the dark horse known as Zero Wing. However, it was also because of Zero Wing's existence that Frost Heaven did not dare compete with the various superpowers lest it be ganged upon. Vice Guild Leader, do you think Frost Heaven will give up just like that? When White Feather read the summary on the battle situation, she couldn't help growing curious about Frost Heaven's behavior. It's not impossible. Miracle's ploy is truly vicious. So long as Frost Heaven dares make a move, every other guild will target it. Smiling faintly, Cold Shadow said, "What a pity. If Frost Heaven hadn't invited Zero Wing, it might have had a chance to fight for the 6th seat. Now it has no chance at all." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. At this moment, Cold Shadow wasn't the only person who thought that Frost Heaven had given up. The various participating superpowers believed the same and deemed it a wise decision. After all, if Frost Heaven chose to fight, it would only end up getting annihilated. Conserving its strength to fight next year was undoubtedly the better choice. While the various guilds were watching their guild points rise, Frost Heaven's members were sneaking up to Mythology's resource nodes, their hearts pounding with anxiety and excitement. After glancing at the distant advanced resource node that Mythology guarded tightly, Shifeng checked the time. It's time. Move out. Chapter 27-23, Arena shaken. The scorching sun was high up in the sky, and the sea breeze blowing through the islands was calm. The embers of war on the various islands were weakening. At this point, aside from attacking and occupying more resource nodes, what was more important for the participating superpowers was defending their resource nodes. Hence, any guild that had secured resource nodes would be able to allocate only a small portion of their manpower to fight for more resource nodes. Due to this reason, the balance between the guilds stabilized. At this rate, the struggle for the sixth seat should be between Miracle and Sacred Temple. A hint of envy flashed in Mu Lingsha's eyes when she saw the various islands' resource node distribution data. Although the winners of this competition wouldn't join the ranks of the 12 great guilds and couldn't garrison an entire empire, the reserve seats still allowed guilds to garrison the cities of an empire. In addition, reserve guilds could also garrison powerful kingdoms and be worshipped by the kingdom. At that time, they could directly influence the development of the kingdom. In fact, reserve guilds could initiate kingdom wars to plunder the resources of other countries and expand their own kingdom's territory and resources. At that time, the resources the reserve guilds could obtain would far surpass that of other guilds, making it impossible for other guilds to catch up. All the other guilds would be able to do was watch as the reserve guilds grew stronger by the day. However, Frost Heaven is behaving really strangely. Unyielding Heart studied the battlefield's stabilizing situation in puzzlement. Frost Heaven clearly had a chance to secure the sixth seat before. There's no reason for it not to put up a fight. After all, the various guilds banding together is only a possibility. So long as Frost Heaven doesn't behave too aggressively right off the bat, I'm sure those guilds won't deliberately join hands. At most, they will come to a tacit understanding to contain Frost Heaven. Frost Heaven has already missed its chance. Even if it tries to fight now, it doesn't have a ghost of a chance of winning, Mu Lingsha countered, shaking her head. Now that the situation between the guilds was stabilizing, Frost Heaven would have difficulty snatching resource nodes. And if it really started snatching resource nodes, the various guilds would definitely gang up on it. This was because the various guilds all understood one thing. Every one of them would secretly cooperate with this tacit understanding. And the result of such thinking would be that the various guilds really would act on their thoughts, annihilate Frost Heaven, and fight over Frost Heaven's resource nodes. Hence, Frost Heaven truly did not have any chance of winning anymore. During Mu Lingsha and Unyielding Heart's conversation, their spectator interface suddenly sent them a notification. Black Flame is taking action. Mu Lingsha quickly redirected the interface to Island number 3 and focused on Shifeng, whom she had set as a priority target beforehand. Black Flame's moving at this time? What is he thinking? Unyielding Heart stared in confusion at Shifeng, who was hiding in a forest, together with his team. It was pointless for Zero Wing to appear and compete for resource nodes at this point. Currently, out of the 18 islands, Frost Heaven occupied resource nodes on only island number 17. It hadn't claimed a single resource node on the other islands. Even if Zero Wing managed to secure 2 resource nodes on island number 3 and became the 6th-ranked guild there, it still wouldn't get Frost Heaven out of its rut. Wait, that's not right. Mu Lingsha gaped in shock when she saw the advanced resource node Shifeng's team was charging at, her eyes wide with confusion and surprise. His goal seems to be Mythology's advanced resource node. Unyielding Heart was similarly stunned by this situation. How dare he? That was Mythology they were talking about. Mythology was one of the 5 great super guilds and an existence the various superpowers dreaded, yet Shifeng was taking the initiative to provoke it. However, before Mu Lingsha and Unyielding Soul could recover from their shock, another notification appeared on their spectator interface, followed by a small image at the bottom of the screen. This is Zero Wing planning to wage war on Mythology? Depicted in the smaller image was Gentle Snow leading her 100-man team in a charge against Mythology's intermediate resource node on Island Number 3, and she showed no signs of stopping whatsoever. Being the unyielding soul members in the VIP room gasped at this abrupt change. How dare they? This action challenged Mythology's authority. Moreover, regardless of whether Zero Wing succeeded or not, Mythology definitely wouldn't let Zero Wing off the hook. Not to mention, Zero Wing had nothing to gain whatsoever from doing so. At this time, besides unyielding souls members, the powers paying attention to Shifeng and Gentle Snow were similarly dumbfounded by the two's actions. They never thought that Zero Wing would be so crazy as to challenge one of the 5 great super guilds directly. Wait. It's not just Black Flame and Gentle Snow. Zero Wing's other teams are also making a move against Mythology's resource nodes. That's not all. Frost Heaven's teams are doing the same. The news of Zero Wing's and Frost Heaven's teams attacking Mythology's resource nodes caused an instant sensation among the various major powers in the VIP viewing rooms. Everyone was shocked by the two guilds' actions. That's Mythology we are talking about. How dare they? Frost Heaven and Zero Wing have truly lost their minds this time. Setting aside whether they will succeed or not, aren't they afraid of Mythology's retaliation after the competition? Are they really not afraid that Mythology will exterminate them? The various major powers felt puzzled by Zero Wing's and Frost Heaven's actions. They simply couldn't figure out what the two guilds were thinking. The 5 great super guilds' position in the virtual gaming industry was as stable as a mountain because no superpower dared to offend them. Any superpower that dared to do so would get eliminated from the industry without exception. Now that Zero Wing and Frost Heaven were openly provoking Mythology in front of everyone in the world, Mythology definitely wouldn't spare them in order to maintain its authority. Has Seven Wonders lost his mind? Cold Shadow was incensed when she read the report that Mythology's resource nodes had come under attack on 6 islands. They actually dare provoke us? Do they not know what death is? She never thought that Zero Wing and Frost Heaven would pull such an astonishing move after remaining silent for so long. Moreover, they had even chosen to challenge one of the 5 great super guilds directly. This would definitely turn Mythology into a laughingstock. Interesting. This is truly interesting. I wonder if that old drunken ghost is jumping in rage right about now? When a mighty middle-aged man with brown hair on Island Number 2 received news of Zero Wing's and Frost Heaven's actions, he burst into laughter. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This middle-aged man was none other than the guild leader of Netherworld Empire, one of the 5 great super guilds. Guild leader, it is still too early to be happy. How can Mythology's resource nodes be so easy to capture? Zero Wing and Frost Heaven are just looking to humiliate themselves, a tall man clad in dark gray armor said disdainfully. Zero Wing could be said to be a guild that had relied entirely on external aid to reach its current position. Although Black Flame and Gentle Snow indeed possessed noteworthy combat standards, they were still negligible existences in front of the 5 great super guilds. Regardless, having Mythology lose some face is always a good thing, the middle-aged man said, chuckling. As for how long Zero Wing and Frost Heaven can last, that's not important. Mythology was one of the 5 great super guilds. It possessed trump cards beyond the imagination of ordinary superpowers. The forces it had stationed on the various large islands were particularly exceptional. Even working together, Black Flame and Gentle Snow would most likely have a tough time threatening any of Mythology's resource nodes. Not to mention, both of them were taking independent action. As the various powers were feeling surprised and shocked by Zero Wing's and Frost Heaven's actions, Shifeng's 100-man team had arrived before Mythology's advanced resource node. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.